This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. It all started when I flunked out of college. I was lost, with no direction and mounting student debt. That's when I saw the ad for forest ranger positions in Fire Valley. It seemed like the perfect escape. Live in nature, away from my problems. Little did I know I was walking into a nightmare. There were 5 of us selected for the 90-day probationary period at Fire Tower 4. Me, Bruce, Claire, Miguel, and Laura. Ranger Keller drove us up the winding mountain roads to our new home, an aging wooden structure perched on the edge of a cliff. The views were breathtaking, but there was an eerie stillness to the dense forests surrounding us. "Your job is simple," Keller explained gruffly. "Watch for fires, report any issues, and don't leave the tower." He seemed eager to get back down the mountain. The first few weeks were uneventful. We settled into a routine of lookout shifts, chores, and killing time with card games. But as the days grew shorter, things started to change. It was Miguel who first spotted them. Strange, flickering lights moving through the trees at night. We all crowded around the windows, straining to see. "What the hell are those?" Bruce whispered. They looked almost human-shaped, but translucent and glowing with an otherworldly blue-white light. They drifted slowly between the trees, never making a sound. "The Fire People," Miguel dubbed them with a nervous laugh. The name stuck. At first we were fascinated. We'd argue about what they could be: bioluminescent organisms, swamp gas, even ghosts. But as the nights went on, the Fire People started appearing more frequently, and they were getting closer to the tower. I'll never forget the first night they came right up to the base of the structure. I was on watch, and suddenly they were there, dozens of them, surrounding us on all sides. My hand shook as I grabbed the radio to wake the others. We huddled together in the dark, watching in terrified silence. The figures seemed to be examining the tower, drifting back and forth. One reached out towards the wall with a limb made of light. I swear I could hear a faint sizzling sound. Just before dawn, they melted back into the forest. None of us slept that night. From then on, it was like a siege. The Fire People would appear every night, getting bolder, pressing closer to the tower. We'd hear scraping and thumping against the walls. The air became thick with a strange, acrid smell. We tried radioing Ranger Keller, but got nothing but static. Cell phones were useless out here. We were completely cut off. Tensions in the tower were at a breaking point. Laura had a full-on breakdown, sobbing uncontrollably. Bruce became manic, insisting we needed to fight back somehow. Claire withdrew into herself, barely speaking. It was Christmas Eve when everything went to hell. The Fire People surrounded us in greater numbers than ever before. The whole forest seemed to glow. They began hurling themselves at the tower, and I knew the wood wouldn't hold for long. Miguel snapped. "I can't take this anymore," he screamed. Before we could stop him, he grabbed a backpack and ran out the door. We watched in horror from the windows as Miguel sprinted towards the tree line. The Fire People swarmed him instantly. There was a blinding flash, and then nothing. Miguel was gone. Claire started screaming. Bruce tried to barricade the door. I remember Laura praying in the corner. I don't know how long we lasted after that. Time seemed to blur. The Fire People battered at every wall, every window. Wood splintered, glass cracked. That horrible burning smell filled the air. I have flashes of memory. Bruce being dragged out a broken window, his screams abruptly silenced. Claire's vacant eyes as she walked straight into their waiting arms. Laura. God. Laura. I can still hear her. I don't know why I survived. I remember curling up under a desk, squeezing my eyes shut, certain these were my final moments. The heat was unbearable. The sounds, I'll never forget those sounds. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, watery daylight was streaming through the windows. The tower was in shambles, but the fire people were gone. I was alone. I don't know how long I sat there, numb with shock and grief. It was the roar of a helicopter that finally snapped me out of it. I stumbled outside just as it was landing. Ranger Keller stepped out, looking grim but unsurprised. "You made it," he said simply. "Come on, let's get you out of here." As we flew away from that nightmare, Keller finally explained. The fire people were real, some kind of ancient forest spirits. Surviving them was the final test for new rangers. Those who made it were inducted into the truth that there were things in these woods far stranger and more dangerous than most people could imagine. I quit on the spot. I couldn't imagine going back into those forests knowing what lurked in the shadows. But sometimes, on dark nights, I still see those glowing figures in my dreams. And I wonder, what else is out there, just beyond the light? It was a chilly autumn evening in Itch, Ohio. I was sitting on my front porch, nursing a glass of whiskey and trying to quiet the ghosts of my past. Even after all these years, I couldn't shake the memories of my time on the force or the crushing grief of losing my daughter Lucy. Some wounds never fully heal, I guess. I was about to head inside when I noticed two figures walking up my driveway. As they got closer, I recognized Sophia and Elena Salato, sisters who lived a few houses down. They seemed on edge, glancing over their shoulders like they were being followed. "Evening, ladies," I called out. "Everything all right?" Sophia, the younger one, looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Mr. Miller, we need your help. Something strange is happening and we don't know who else to turn to." I straightened up, my old cop instincts kicking in. "Come on in and tell me what's going on." As we sat in my living room, the sisters took turns explaining. They'd been seeing weird lights coming from the abandoned lighthouse on the edge of town, shadows moving when they shouldn't, and they swore they heard whispers carried on the wind, speaking in a language they couldn't understand. I tried to reassure them, told them it was probably just kids messing around, but something in their eyes made me uneasy. There was real fear there. "We'll go check it out tomorrow," I promised, "first thing in the morning." They seemed relieved as they left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I tossed and turned all night, plagued by nightmares of Lucy calling out to me from some dark, twisted place. The next morning, I headed over to the Salato house to pick up the sisters. But when I got there, the front door was wide open. Inside, the place was a mess. Furniture overturned, pictures knocked off the walls, and no sign of Sophia or Elena. My heart started racing. This was bad, really bad. I called out their names, searched every room, but they were gone. As I was about to call the police, I noticed something on the kitchen table. A note written in shaky handwriting. "The lighthouse. Help us." I didn't hesitate. I jumped in my car and sped towards the old lighthouse, my mind racing with possibilities. What the hell was going on? As I pulled up to the dilapidated structure, I saw a figure standing near the entrance. It was a woman I'd never seen before, with long dark hair and intricate tattoos covering her arms. She looked at me with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Dennis Miller," she said, her voice low and gravelly. "I've been waiting for you." I approached cautiously, hand instinctively reaching for a gun that wasn't there anymore. "Who are you? Where are Sophia and Elena?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My name is June, and I'm here to show you the truth." Before I could respond, she turned and walked into the lighthouse. Against my better judgment, I followed. The interior was nothing like I expected. Instead of old, rusty equipment, the place was filled with strange machines humming with energy. In the center stood a massive contraption that looked like a cross between a telescope and a generator. "What is all this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. June ran her hand along one of the machines. "This is the work of Alfred Dumont, a man who discovered the threads that connect our world to others." I shook my head, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm here to find Sophia and Elena. Where are they?" June's expression softened. "They're safe, Dennis, but they're no longer in our world, and neither is your daughter." The mention of Lucy hit me like a punch to the gut. "What the hell are you talking about?" She walked over to the central machine and pressed a series of buttons. The air around us began to shimmer and distort. "Let me show you." Suddenly the lighthouse vanished. We were standing in a twisted version of Itch, the buildings warped and stretched, the sky a sickly green. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "What? How?" I couldn't form a coherent thought. June grabbed my arm to steady me. "This is one of the other worlds, Dennis. A place where the lines between reality and nightmare blur. Sophia and Elena accidentally found their way here. And so did Lucy, all those years ago." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Lucy's alive? She's here?" June's grip tightened. "In a manner of speaking. But Dennis, you need to understand. This place, it changes people. The Lucy you knew. She may not be the same." I pulled away from her, anger and hope warring inside me. "I don't care. Take me to her, now." We made our way through the warped streets of this other Itch. Everything was familiar, yet horribly wrong. I saw faces in windows that weren't quite human, heard sounds that made my skin crawl. As we turned a corner, I saw her, Lucy, my little girl, standing at the end of the street. But June was right, she wasn't the same. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were solid black, and when she smiled, I saw rows of sharp teeth. "Daddy," she said, her voice echoing strangely, "you finally came for me." I took a step forward, tears streaming down my face. "Lucy, baby, I'm here. I'm going to take you home." She cocked her head to the side, that inhuman smile still in place. "But I am home, Daddy, and now you can stay with me forever." I felt June's hand on my shoulder. "Dennis, listen to me. That's not Lucy anymore. Not really. This world, it twists everything it touches. If you stay, you'll become like her." I wanted to argue, to scream that she was wrong, but deep down, I knew the truth. The thing in front of me might wear Lucy's face, but my daughter was gone. Lucy, or whatever she had become, started walking towards us. "Don't listen to her, Daddy. We can be a family again, just like you always wanted." I stumbled back, my heart breaking all over again. "I'm sorry, Lucy. I'm so sorry, but I can't stay." Her face contorted with rage, all pretense of humanity falling away. She lunged at us, but June was faster. She grabbed my arm, and suddenly we were back in the lighthouse. I fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. June knelt beside me, her voice gentle. "I'm sorry, Dennis. I truly am. But now you know the truth." As the initial shock wore off, anger took its place. I stood up, fists clenched. "We have to destroy this thing. No one else can go through that hell." June nodded solemnly. "I agree, But first, we need to bring Sophia and Elena back. Over the next few hours, June taught me how to operate Dumont's machine. We searched through multiple realities, catching glimpses of horrors I'll never be able to forget. Finally, we found the sisters, huddled together in a world of endless fog and whispers. When we pulled them back, they were shaken but alive. I sent them home with strict instructions not to tell anyone what had happened. They didn't need much convincing. As dawn broke, June and I set about dismantling the machine. We worked in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. When it was done, all that remained was a small piece of curved glass, the linchpin of Dumont's invention. I took the glass and walked down to the lake. As I stood on the shore, I thought about Lucy, about the life we should have had, and I made peace with the fact that she was gone. With all the strength I had, I hurled the glass into the water. As it disappeared beneath the waves, I swear I heard Lucy's laugh, not the twisted version from that other world, but the pure, joyful sound I remembered. I turned back to the lighthouse where June was waiting. "It's done," I said. She nodded, a sad smile on her face. "You did the right thing, Dennis. Some doors are better left closed." As we walked away from the lighthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The grief was still there, it always would be. But now I could move forward, knowing that I'd faced my demons and come out the other side. I never saw June again after that day. Sometimes I wonder if she was even real, or just another part of that strange, terrible night. But every now and then, when the wind blows just right off the lake, I swear I can hear whispers from another world, and I smile, knowing that some mysteries are better left unsolved. It all started when I took a job as a caretaker at an old lighthouse in Itch, Ohio. I know, weird place for a lighthouse, right? But this wasn't your typical coastal beacon. This lighthouse sat on the edge of town, overlooking endless cornfields instead of crashing waves. From the moment I arrived, something felt off about the place. The lighthouse itself was a looming monstrosity, all twisted metal and strange angles that hurt your eyes if you looked at it too long. But the owner, Alfred Dumont, seemed nice enough at first. Eccentric, sure, but harmless. He was this frail old guy, probably in his 80s, with wild white hair and eyes that never seemed to focus on anything. Alfred lived in the little cottage next to the lighthouse. My job was simple: maintain the grounds, keep an eye on things, and most importantly, keep the light burning at night. No matter what, the light must never go out, Alfred told me sternly on my first day. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just some old man's quirk. For the first few weeks, things were pretty quiet. I'd do my rounds during the day, chatting with Alfred occasionally. He'd go on these long rambles about his sister Clara, who died in the war, and how he'd dedicated his life to finding her again. I nodded along politely, assuming it was just the ramblings of a grief-stricken old man. But then I started noticing weird things, like how Alfred would spend hours staring at old pieces of colored glass, muttering to himself, or the eerie humming that sometimes came from the top of the lighthouse late at night, and the way animals avoided the place. Not a single bird ever landed on the lighthouse, not even to build nests. One night, about a month into my stay, I woke up to a blinding light flooding my room. It was coming from the lighthouse, but this wasn't the usual steady beam. This light pulsed and swirled with unnatural colors. I threw on some clothes and ran outside to check it out. As I approached the lighthouse, the air felt thick and heavy, like wading through invisible syrup. The humming I'd heard before was now a deafening drone that made my teeth ache. I called out for Alfred but got no response. When I reached the base of the lighthouse, I saw Alfred. He was on his knees, arms raised to the sky, shouting something I couldn't make out over the noise. Scattered around him were dozens of pieces of that weird colored glass, all glowing with an inner light. I tried to get closer, to pull Alfred away, but an invisible force held me back. That's when I saw it, a shimmering tear in the air above the lighthouse. Through it, I caught glimpses of something. Other places, maybe? Other worlds? It was like looking through a kaleidoscope of reality. Suddenly, Alfred turned to me. His eyes were wild, glowing with the same unnatural light as the glass. "I've found her," he screamed. "Clara, she's here." Before I could react, Alfred lunged for the largest piece of glass. As soon as he touched it, there was a blinding flash and a sound like reality itself was tearing apart. When my vision cleared, Alfred was gone. Just gone. All that remained were the scattered pieces of glass, now dull and lifeless. I'd like to say that was the end of it, that I called the police, they investigated, and that was that. But it wasn't, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear that humming, and when I look out my window, I swear I can see flashes of that strange, swirling light coming from the abandoned lighthouse. I don't know what Alfred found that night. I don't know if he really discovered some way to peer into other worlds, or if it was all just the delusions of a broken mind. But I do know this. There are things out there beyond our understanding, things that we're probably better off not messing with. I quit that job the very next day and moved as far from Itch as I could. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever Alfred unleashed that night is still out there, waiting, watching. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder, what if he really did find a way to other worlds? And what if something followed him back? I've tried to rationalize it all away. Tell myself it was just stress, or maybe someone slipped something into my drink. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. The memory of that night is burned into my brain, every terrifying detail as clear as if it happened yesterday. The worst part is the not knowing. Not knowing what really happened to Alfred. Not knowing what he found or what found him. Sometimes I catch myself staring at odd pieces of glass, wondering if I could see what he saw. But then I remember the look in his eyes that night, that mix of triumph and terror, and I force myself to look away. I've done some digging since then, trying to find out more about Alfred and his obsession. Turns out he'd been working on this for decades. After his sister died, he became convinced she wasn't really gone, just elsewhere. He poured his entire fortune into researching parallel worlds, collecting artifacts, and finally building that God-forsaken lighthouse. The locals in Itch had all sorts of stories about Alfred and his lighthouse. Some said they'd seen strange lights and heard unearthly sounds coming from it for years. Others swore they'd seen people around the lighthouse who vanished if you looked at them too long. Most folks just avoided the place altogether. I've thought about going back, just to see if there's any trace left of what happened that night. But every time I seriously consider it, I'm overwhelmed by a sense of dread so powerful it nearly paralyzes me. Whatever's there, it doesn't want to be found. Or maybe it's afraid of what it might find. There are nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that damn humming again. I'll run to the window, half expecting to see that swirling, impossible light. But it's always just the normal darkness of night. At least, I think it is. Sometimes I'm not so sure anymore. I've tried talking to people about what happened, but no one believes me. They pat me on the back, tell me it was just a bad dream or too much to drink. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That night changed something fundamental about the way I see the world. It's like a veil was lifted just for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of what's really out there. I can't help but wonder about Clara sometimes. Was Alfred right? Is she really out there somewhere, trapped in some parallel world? And if she is, what kind of existence is that? Is she aware? Is she suffering? The thought keeps me up at night sometimes. And what about Alfred? Did he find what he was looking for? Did he reunite with his long-lost sister? Or is he lost now, too, adrift in some incomprehensible realm beyond our own? Part of me hopes he found peace, finally, but another part of me is terrified at the thought of what might have found him instead. I've tried to move on with my life, to pretend that night never happened, but I can't. It's always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Every time I see an old piece of colored glass, or hear an odd humming, or catch a glimpse of a strange light out of the corner of my eye, it all comes rushing back. Sometimes I think about trying to recreate what Alfred did, to see if I could peer through to those other worlds myself. But then I remember the look on his face, the raw fear mixed with manic glee, and I know I could never risk it. Whatever's out there, it's not meant for us to see. So I live with this knowledge, this burden. I go about my days like everything's normal, but inside I'm screaming. Because I know the truth. Our world isn't what we think it is. Reality is so much stranger, so much more terrifying than we could ever imagine. And sometimes, if you look in just the right way, with just the right tools, you can see beyond the veil. But once you do, you can never unsee it. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe I'm hoping someone out there has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm just trying to warn people. Or maybe I'm finally losing my grip on reality, just like Alfred did. All I know is that I'll never forget that night at the lighthouse, and I'll always wonder what's really out there, just beyond the light. It all started last summer in Itch, the small lakeside town where I've lived my whole life. Everyone knows everyone here, but there were always rumors and whispers about the Salato family. Elena and Sophia, two sisters around my age, lived in that old Victorian house on Maple Street with their mom. We'd see them around town sometimes, but they mostly kept to themselves. Their mom was, well, let's just say she had a reputation, always stumbling out of the rusty anchor bar, slurring her words. The girls seemed to take care of themselves mostly. Elena was the older one, dark-haired and serious. Sophia was a year younger, with this wild red hair and mischievous smile. I didn't know them well, but that all changed one night in late August. I was working the late shift at the gas station when Elena burst in, eyes wild with panic. "Dennis, please, I need help," she gasped. "It's Sophia. Something's happened." My heart started racing. "What's wrong? Where is she?" "The lighthouse," Elena choked out. "We were just messing around and now she's... I didn't wait to hear more. I flipped the closed sign, grabbed my keys, and we sped off towards Lake Bain. The old lighthouse there hadn't been used in years, but local kids sometimes hung out there for a thrill. When we pulled up, the place was eerily quiet. No sign of Sophia anywhere. "She was just here," Elena kept saying. "We climbed up to the top and then..." We searched for hours, called her name until our voices were hoarse. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. By the time the sun came up, half the town was out looking. They dragged the lake, combed the woods. No trace. In the days that followed, things got weird. Really weird. Elena insisted Sophia was still alive, that she'd come home. But she wouldn't let anyone in the house to check. Their mom was useless, too drunk to even realize what was happening. About a week after Sophia disappeared, I saw her. At least I thought I did. It was late, and I was walking home from work. There was a figure standing under a streetlight, red hair gleaming. My heart leapt. "Sophia?" I called out. She turned, and for a split second I swore it was her. But then her face seemed to ripple like a reflection in disturbed water, and her eyes, they were pitch black, empty. I blinked and she was gone. I tried to convince myself I was seeing things, stressed from the search. But then other people started reporting similar sightings. A flash of red hair in a window. A girl who looked like Sophia, but wrong somehow. Always at night, always disappearing in an instant. The whole town was on edge. Whispers of ghosts, demons, all kinds of crazy theories. I couldn't shake the memory of those black eyes. What the hell had happened in that lighthouse? I started digging, trying to piece together the Salato family's history. It wasn't easy. Seems like they'd moved around a lot before settling in Itch. But I managed to track down some old newspaper clippings, birth records. That's when things got even stranger. I found Elena and Sophia's birth certificates, but the father's name was blacked out on both. And then I stumbled across another certificate. A third Salato sister, born 2 years before Elena, named June. I'd never heard of a third sister. Where was she? What happened to her? The more I dug, the more questions I had. And the more convinced I became that the key to Sophia's disappearance lay in the family's past. I tried talking to Elena about it, but she shut down completely. Wouldn't even open the door. I caught glimpses of her through the windows sometimes, looking pale and haunted. And once I swore I saw 2 figures in Sophia's room, but the second one was just a dark, twisted shape. Weeks passed. The official search was called off. Life in Itch tried to return to normal, but there was this underlying current of fear. Parents kept their kids inside after dark. No one went near the lighthouse. Then one night in October, everything came to a head. I was working late again when I got a frantic call from my buddy Steve at the police station. "Dennis, get to the Salato house now," he said. "Something's happening." I raced over, heart pounding. The street was chaos, cop cars, an ambulance, neighbors gawking. The front door of the Salato house was wide open, warm light spilling out into the night. I pushed my way through the crowd, flashing my volunteer firefighter badge to get past the police line. Inside, I found Elena huddled on the couch, shaking. Paramedics were loading her mom onto a stretcher. Looked like she'd finally drunk herself into oblivion. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, with streaks of gray in her dark hair. She had her arm around Elena, murmuring softly to her. One of the cops filled me in. Neighbors had called about screaming from the house. When police arrived, they found this scene and the mystery woman. She claimed to be June Salato, the long-lost older sister. My head was spinning. June was real? Where had she been all this time? And what about Sophia? I approached cautiously. June looked up, and I was struck by how much she resembled Elena. Same sharp cheekbones, same intense gaze. "You must be Dennis," she said softly. "Elena's told me about you." I had a million questions, but before I could ask any of them, I heard a noise from upstairs. A low, guttural moan that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. June's eyes widened in fear. "She's awake," Elena whispered. June turned to the cops. "You need to leave. Now, all of you. I can handle this." They argued, but something in June's voice brooked no argument. Within minutes, the house was cleared. Just me, Elena, June, and whatever was upstairs. June turned to me. "Dennis, I know you care about my sisters, but you need to go too. It's not safe." I stood my ground. "Not until you tell me what the hell is going on. Where's Sophia? What happened in that lighthouse?" June sighed heavily. "It's complicated. Our family, we're not like other people. We have abilities, a connection to things beyond this world. Sophia, she opened a door she shouldn't have. Let something in." As if on cue, there was a crash from above, a high, keening wail that didn't sound human. June grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. "Please go. I'll explain everything later, I promise. But right now, I need to help my sister." I wanted to stay, to demand answers. But the look in June's eyes, I knew she was telling the truth. Whatever was up there, it was beyond anything I could handle. I left that night with more questions than answers. In the weeks that followed, the Salato house was quiet. Lights on at odd hours, strange noises sometimes. But June and Elena kept to themselves. Sophia was never officially found. The town slowly began to forget, to move on. But I couldn't shake the memory of that night, of June's words about abilities and other worlds, of that inhuman cry from upstairs. I still see Elena sometimes, at the grocery store or post office. She looks tired, but okay. June, too. She's become a fixture in town, protective of her younger sister. They're friendly, but distant, like they're carrying a weight no one else can understand. As for Sophia, sometimes, late at night, I swear I catch a glimpse of red hair out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement in the shadows. But when I turn to look, there's never anything there. I don't know if I'll ever understand what really happened that summer. But I do know this: there are things in this world beyond our understanding, and sometimes it's better not to go looking for answers you're not prepared to face. I was just a junior science officer on the International Space Station when everything went to hell. Looking back, I can't believe how quickly it all spiraled out of control. It started as a routine day. We were analyzing some meteor samples that had recently been collected during a spacewalk. Dr. Haber, our lead xenobiologist, was excitedly examining a particularly interesting specimen under the microscope. "Come take a look at this," he called out to me in his thick Russian accent. "I've never seen bacterial structures quite like these before." I peered into the microscope, seeing strange spiral-shaped organisms unlike anything in our database. Little did I know those alien bacteria would change our lives forever. A few hours later, Dr. Haber started complaining of a headache and dizziness. His skin looked pale and clammy. We assumed it was just a touch of space sickness, not uncommon even for veteran astronauts. But by that evening, things had taken a shocking turn. I'll never forget the moment I walked into the lab and saw Dr. Haber hunched over his workstation. His skin had taken on an ashen gray color, like a corpse. But he was very much alive, working feverishly and mumbling to himself. "Dr. Haber," I said cautiously, "are you all right?" He turned to look at me with wild eyes. "Never better," he exclaimed. "My mind, it's expanding. I can think so clearly now. And look." To my horror, he grabbed a scalpel and sliced open his own forearm. But instead of blood, a thick gray fluid oozed out. "No pain," he said with a maniacal grin. "My cells are regenerating at an incredible rate, and I no longer require oxygen to survive. Don't you see? The bacteria. It's changing us, improving us." I backed away, my heart racing. This was so far beyond anything we were prepared to deal with. I had to tell the captain immediately, but it was already too late. By the time I reached Captain Shaw's quarters, half the crew was showing signs of infection. Gray skin, enhanced strength and reflexes, modified cellular structures. They were changing before our eyes into something not quite human. The captain's face went pale as I described the situation. "We have to contact Mission Control," I urged. "Request immediate evacuation." But Shaw shook his head grimly. "No. If word of this gets out, there's no telling what could happen. Mass panic, an international crisis. We need to contain this." "But sir," I protested, "the entire crew is infected. We're all going to—" "Not all of us," he interrupted. "You and I seem to be immune so far. We need to quarantine the station. No communications in or out. As far as the world knows, we've been hit by meteor debris and are experiencing technical difficulties." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to cover this up? But what about the infected crew members? They need help." Shaw's expression hardened. "They're beyond help now. But think of the potential here. These changes, they could revolutionize space exploration. Imagine astronauts who don't need oxygen or radiation shielding, who can withstand extreme temperatures and cosmic radiation. This could be the key to colonizing Mars, exploring deep space." A chill ran down my spine as I realized the captain had no intention of trying to cure or rescue the infected crew. To him, they were now test subjects, potential prototypes for a new breed of enhanced space explorer. Over the next few hours, we worked to seal off sections of the station, segregating the infected crew members. Their mutations continued to progress rapidly. Some developed tentacle-like appendages. Others' skin became metallic and shimmered like the surface of the meteor samples. A few even seemed to be developing crude exoskeletons. Dr. Haber was by far the most altered. His body had elongated to nearly 7 feet tall, with spindly gray limbs and bulbous head. When he spoke, it was in an eerie, multi-toned voice that seemed to emanate from his entire body. "Why do you fear us?" he asked, as Shaw and I observed him through a containment window. "We are the future, the next step in human evolution. Join us and experience true freedom from the constraints of your frail human forms." I felt my skin crawl. Whatever Haber had become, it certainly wasn't human anymore. As the days wore on, Shaw and I struggled to maintain control of the situation. We were vastly outnumbered by the infected crew, who were growing stronger and more alien by the hour. They seemed to be developing a hive mind of sorts, working in unison to try to break out of their containment. Our cover story to Mission Control was wearing thin. They were getting suspicious about our lack of video communications and garbled transmissions. Shaw knew it was only a matter of time before they sent a rescue mission. On the 5th day, disaster struck. While I was sleeping, several of the infected managed to breach containment. I awoke to blaring alarms and the sounds of inhuman shrieks echoing through the station. Grabbing an emergency oxygen mask, I raced toward the command module. The corridors were in chaos. Writhing tentacles burst through wall panels. Metallic claws tore at airlocks. The very structure of the station seemed to be morphing, overtaken by some kind of organic growth. I found Shaw barricaded in the comm center, frantically sending out a distress call. "Mayday, Mayday," he shouted into the radio. "This is Captain Shaw aboard the ISS. We are under attack by unknown hostile." His words were cut off as a grotesque figure smashed through the doorway. Dr. Haber in his final mutated form. In one swift motion, he impaled Shaw with a razor-sharp appendage. I let out an involuntary scream. Haber's massive head swiveled towards me, compound eyes gleaming. "The captain was short-sighted," he said in that unsettling multi-voice. "He sought to control and exploit us. But we are beyond that now. join us willingly, or be forcibly evolved. Tentacles lashed out, trying to ensnare me. I dove and rolled, making a mad dash for the escape pod. Claws and tendrils grasped at me from all sides as I ran. I could feel the strange bacteria trying to burrow into my skin to change me. But for whatever reason, luck, genetics, sheer force of will, I remained uninfected. I reached the pod with seconds to spare, slamming the hatch shut just as Haber's monstrous form rounded the corner. The last thing I saw as the pod ejected was his alien face pressed against the porthole, eyes full of cold alien hunger. The pod's systems registered massive structural damage to the station as I plummeted towards Earth. Whether from the mutations or deliberate sabotage, the ISS was breaking apart. I watched in horror as the station, my home for the past year, disintegrated in a spectacular fireball. Any evidence of what transpired there burned up in the atmosphere. My pod splashed down in the Pacific a few hours later. I was immediately quarantined by NASA and subjected to a battery of tests, but they found no trace of the alien bacteria. To this day, I'm not sure why I was spared infection. The official story, of course, is that the ISS was destroyed by an undetected meteor strike. My fellow crew members have been declared casualties of a tragic accident, but I know the truth. I still have nightmares about Haber's alien eyes, the writhing tentacles, the horrible transformations, and sometimes, on clear nights, I look up at the stars and wonder, did any of them survive? Are they still out there, evolving into something beyond human comprehension? And will they one day return to finish what they started? I don't have any answers. All I know is that I'll never look at the night sky the same way again. Because now I know with certainty we are not alone in the universe, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. It started as a routine day. I was doing my usual rounds, checking trail conditions and looking out for any issues. The weather was perfect, sunny but cool, with a light breeze rustling through the trees. I love days like that in the forest. Around midday, I ran into a hiker named Emma, who seemed pretty shaken up. She told me she had encountered a young boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, alone and crying in a remote part of the forest. My first thought was that we needed to find this kid's parents ASAP. But as Emma recounted her experience, I realized this was no ordinary lost child situation. She said when she approached the boy to help, he became extremely agitated. Emma tried to calm him down and offer assistance, but he lashed out with shocking strength, actually knocking her to the ground. She showed me some nasty bruises on her arms. I couldn't believe a small child could do that kind of damage. The strangest part was that the boy kept insisting he lived nearby, even though there are no houses for miles in that area. Emma said he pointed deeper into the forest, claiming his home was just past the next ridge. When she tried to lead him towards the ranger station instead, he became even more enraged. I'll admit, I was skeptical of Emma's story at first. I wondered if maybe she had fallen and hit her head and was confused about what really happened. But she seemed completely lucid, just frightened and bewildered by the encounter. I took down all the details and promised to investigate. After Emma left, I radioed back to base about the situation. My supervisor said there were no missing child reports in the area, but to keep an eye out just in case. I spent the rest of the afternoon combing that section of forest, looking for any sign of the boy or his supposed house. As the sun started to set, I was about ready to call it a day. That's when I heard it, a child's laughter echoing through the trees. I called out, asking if anyone was there. For a moment, Silence. Then another peal of laughter, closer this time. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of movement, a small figure darting between the trees. "Hey!" I shouted. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The boy stepped into view about 20 feet away. He looked exactly as Emma had described, maybe 5 or 6, with tousled brown hair and wide eyes that seemed to glow in the twilight. But there was something off about him. His skin was so pale it was almost translucent, and he moved with an unnatural fluidity. "Hi there," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and friendly. "Are you lost? Let's get you back to your parents." The boy cocked his head to the side and grinned. It wasn't a normal child's smile. It was too wide, showing far too many teeth. "I'm not lost," he said. His voice had a strange echo to it. "I live here. Want to play?" Every instinct told me to get out of there, but I couldn't just leave a child alone in the forest at night. I took a step closer. "Okay, we can play for a little bit, but then we really need to find your family." The boy's grin widened even further. "Catch me if you can," he shouted, and then he was off, running impossibly fast through the underbrush. I chased after him, calling for him to stop, but he was always just ahead of me, giggling and darting between trees. I'm in good shape, but I could barely keep up. We went deeper and deeper into the forest, far off any marked trails. After what felt like hours, I lost sight of him completely. I stopped, gasping for breath, and realized I had no idea where I was. The forest looked different here, older, with gnarled trees I didn't recognize. An unnatural silence hung in the air. That's when I saw the cave entrance. It was half hidden behind a curtain of vines, but there was no mistaking the yawning black hole in the hillside. And there, silhouetted in the entrance, was the boy. "Come on," he called, his voice echoing strangely. "Don't you want to see where I live?" Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to follow him into that cave, but I felt an irresistible pull, like I was caught in a current. My feet carried me forward against my will. As I approached the entrance, the air grew cold. I could hear whispers coming from the darkness, too faint to make out the words. The boy's eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Welcome home," he said, reaching out a pale hand. I woke up the next morning on the forest floor, miles from where I had started. My clothes were torn and dirty, and I had scratches all over my arms and face. I had no memory of what happened after I reached the cave entrance. I've been back to that area of the forest every day since, searching for any sign of the boy or the cave, but I can never find that exact spot again. Sometimes I think I hear distant laughter on the wind, or catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. But when I turn to look, there's nothing there. I don't know what to make of what happened. Was it all some kind of hallucination, a vivid dream? Or did I really encounter something beyond explanation in those woods? All I know is that I'll never look at the forest the same way again. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that eerie, childish laughter in my dreams. A panic set in as I realized how screwed I was. My phone had no signal, I was running low on water, and I had no idea which direction to go. In my frantic rush to find my way back, I lost my footing on some loose rocks and tumbled down a steep slope. Pain shot through my leg as I landed hard at the bottom. I tried to stand but nearly blacked out. My ankle was definitely broken or badly sprained. As I lay there in agony, convinced I was going to die alone in the woods, I heard a voice call out, "Oh my goodness, are you all right?" A woman emerged from the trees, looking concerned. She introduced herself as Haven and said she lived nearby. When she saw the state I was in, she insisted on helping me back to her house to treat my injuries. I was in too much pain to argue, so I let her support me as we slowly made our way through the forest. After what seemed like forever, we reached a rustic cabin nestled in a small clearing. It was bigger than I expected, with 2 stories and a wraparound porch. Haven helped me inside and got me settled on the couch. She bustled around gathering first aid supplies and ice packs for my ankle. As she tended to my injuries, we chatted, and I learned she'd lived out here alone for years. She seemed kind and motherly, clucking over me like a worried hen. "You poor thing, you must be starving. Let me whip up some dinner while that ice does its work," Haven said. She headed to the kitchen, and I heard pots and pans clanging. The house smelled amazing as delicious aromas wafted out. While she cooked, I took in my surroundings. The cabin was cozy but sparsely decorated. Something felt a bit off, but I chalked it up to my rattled nerves. There were no family photos or personal touches you'd expect in someone's home. The walls were oddly bare. Haven returned with a steaming bowl of stew. It tasted incredible, and I devoured it, suddenly realizing how famished I was. As I ate, Haven peppered me with questions about my life, my family, where I was from. She seemed overly interested in the details. I started to get an uneasy feeling, but told myself I was being paranoid after my ordeal. "Well, dear, you should get some rest. You can stay in the guest room upstairs tonight, and we'll figure out how to get you home in the morning," Haven said warmly. She helped me up the creaky stairs to a small bedroom. I was utterly exhausted and fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. Sometime in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me. Then I heard it, shuffling footsteps and whispered voices coming from downstairs. My heart started racing. Haven had said she lived alone, so who else was in the house? I strained to make out what they were saying, but could only catch snippets. "Brought us a good one. Need to prepare the ritual. Tim, go check if he's still asleep." Ice ran through my veins. What the hell was going on? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly lay back down, feigning sleep. The door creaked open and I sensed someone standing over me, watching. After a few tense moments, they left and went back downstairs. As soon as I was sure they were gone, I eased myself out of bed. My ankle throbbed, but adrenaline was coursing through me. I had to get out of there. I crept to the door and peeked out into the hallway. It was clear, so I quietly made my way to the stairs. Hushed voices drifted up from below. I could just make out Haven talking to someone named Tim. They were discussing some kind of ritual and seemed excited about their new specimen. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they were talking about me. I knew I had to see what was going on. Holding my breath, I crouched down and peered through the stair railings into the living room below. What I saw made my blood run cold. Haven was standing with a young man who I assumed was Tim. But they looked wrong. Their skin had an unnatural, waxy sheen to it. And Haven's face, it was like a mask that didn't quite fit right. As I watched in horror, she reached up and began peeling off her face like it was made of rubber. Underneath was something else, not human. Mottled gray skin, bulbous yellow eyes, a mouth full of needle-like teeth. Tim was undergoing a similar transformation. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. "The human's blood smells so sweet," the thing that used to be Haven hissed. "I can't wait to wear his skin." I scrambled backwards, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. But the pain in my ankle told me this was all too real. In my panic, I bumped against a small table in the hallway. A vase crashed to the floor. The voices downstairs immediately went silent. "Tim, go check on our guest," Haven's distorted voice commanded. "If he's awake, you know what to do." Heavy footsteps started up the stairs. Panicked, I ducked into the nearest room and quietly closed the door. It was pitch black inside. I fumbled for a light switch but couldn't find one. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized I was in some kind of storage room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and containers. A rancid, coppery smell permeated the air. As Tim's footsteps got closer, I squinted to make out what was in the jars. My stomach heaved as I realized they were filled with eyeballs. Human eyeballs, floating in some kind of liquid. Dozens of them. I bit back a scream and kept looking around frantically for a way out. That's when I saw the skins. Hanging on hooks along one wall were what looked like full-body suits made of human skin. Some were fresh, others dried and leathery. I recognized Haven's face among them. These creatures were wearing people's skins like costumes. The doorknob started to turn. I looked around desperately and spotted a small window. It was my only chance. I yanked it open and squeezed through just as the door burst open behind me. I tumbled out onto the sloped roof, my injured ankle screaming in agony. I heard angry shouts from inside as I scrambled across the roof. Without thinking, I flung myself off the edge. I hit the ground hard and pain exploded through my whole body, but pure terror kept me going. I lurched to my feet and ran blindly into the dark forest. Inhuman screeches echoed behind me as Haven and Tim gave chase. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me. But I didn't slow down. I ran until my lungs were on fire and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, I couldn't go on. I collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping for air. I lay there for what felt like hours, every snapping twig making me flinch. But the creatures never found me. As dawn broke, I managed to orient myself and stumbled my way back to civilization. I've never been so relieved to see other people in my life. It's been months since that night, but I still have nightmares about yellow eyes and peeling skin. I've tried telling people what happened, but no one believes me. They say I must have hit my head when I fell or eaten some hallucinogenic berries. But I know what I saw was real. Sometimes I imagine I catch glimpses of Haven or Tim out of the corner of my eye, watching me from a crowd, wearing someone else's face, waiting to take mine. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. It all started about 5 years ago when my sister Sky went on a solo backpacking trip through South America. She had always been the adventurous type, constantly seeking out new experiences and pushing her limits. I admired her free spirit, but I also worried about her taking risks. Still, I never imagined anything bad would actually happen to her. Sky had been gone for about 2 months when her messages suddenly stopped coming. At first, I didn't think much of it. She often went off the grid for days at a time when traveling in remote areas. But as days turned into weeks with no word, a gnawing sense of dread started to grow in the pit of my stomach. I reached out to the hostels where she had been staying, the tour companies she had used, even the local authorities in the areas she had visited. No one had seen or heard from her in weeks. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The next few months were a blur of frantic searching, working with embassies and private investigators, plastering her photo across social media. But despite all our efforts, we found no trace of Sky. It was as if she had been swallowed up by the earth itself. As time passed, the active search efforts dwindled. People started to give up hope, to move on with their lives. But I couldn't let it go. The not knowing was torture. I became obsessed with trying to piece together what might have happened to her, which is what led me to that God-forsaken cave system in the mountains of Peru last month. I had heard rumors of an ancient tunnel network that supposedly connected to other dimensions or realms. It sounded crazy, I know, but I was desperate for any lead, any possible explanation for what had happened to Sky. I hired a local guide to take me to the cave entrance, but insisted on exploring inside alone. In hindsight, that was incredibly stupid and dangerous. But I wasn't thinking clearly at that point. The deeper I ventured into the tunnels, the more unsettled I felt. The air was thick and oppressive, and strange echoes seemed to whisper from the shadows. More than once I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. I had been exploring for several hours when I heard it, a faint voice calling my name. At first I thought I was imagining things, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. It sounded just like Sky. My heart started racing. Could it really be her? Had she somehow been trapped down here all this time? I called out to her, my voice echoing off the stone walls. The answering cry seemed to be coming from deeper in the cave system. I rushed forward recklessly, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly as I stumbled over the uneven ground. The voice kept calling, always just out of reach. I don't know how long I ran through those twisting passages, chasing that phantom sound. Finally, I burst into a large cavern and skidded to a stop. The voice had gone silent. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized with growing horror that I was not alone. Gathered around the edges of the chamber were creatures. I don't know how else to describe them. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but wrong somehow. Their limbs were too long, their movements jerky and unnatural. And their faces, God, their faces, noseless and eyeless, with gaping maws filled with needle-like teeth. I stood frozen in terror as one of the things stepped towards me. When it spoke, my blood ran cold. It was Sky's voice coming from that monstrous form. "Jason," it purred in my sister's familiar tones, "I've been waiting for you." I think I screamed then. I don't really remember. Everything after that is a confused blur of panic and adrenaline. Somehow I managed to flee back through the tunnels, those things in close pursuit. I could hear them scuttling along the walls and ceiling, always just behind me. By some miracle, I found my way back to the surface. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest village, babbling hysterically about monsters in the caves. The locals just shook their heads sadly, muttering about another gringo driven mad by the thin mountain air. I know how it sounds. Believe me, there are times I wonder if I really did hallucinate the whole thing. But then I remember the soul-deep terror I felt in that cavern, the inhuman wrongness of those creatures, and I know with sickening certainty that it was all too real. I still don't know what happened to Sky, but after what I experienced in those caves, I'm not sure I want to know anymore. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The nightmares haven't stopped since I got back. Every night I'm back in those tunnels, running from the monsters with Sky's voice. Sometimes in the dreams, I don't make it out in time. I wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the phantom sensation of cold, clawed hands on my skin. I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that by entering those caves, I opened some kind of door that can't be closed. I catch glimpses of twisted, elongated shapes out of the corner of my eye. Strange scratching sounds come from inside the walls at night. Am I losing my mind? Or did I bring something back with me from those caves? Something hungry and patient, waiting for the right moment to drag me back into the darkness. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to sleep, afraid to be alone. I've thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? I have no proof, no evidence of what I saw. They'd think I was crazy or on drugs. I've started sleeping with the lights on, a baseball bat by my bed. I've covered all the mirrors in my apartment. I can't shake the irrational fear of seeing one of those things staring back at me from the reflection. The worst part is the lingering doubt about Sky. Was that really her voice I heard? Is there any chance she could still be alive down there, trapped in some nightmare realm? Or was it all just a cruel trick played by those creatures? I don't think I'll ever know for sure, and that uncertainty is slowly driving me mad. I jump at every sound, flinch at every shadow. I feel like I'm constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I know I can't go on like this much longer. Something has to give. But I don't know how to fix this, how to make it stop. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of fear and paranoia, and I don't know how to swim back to shore. I'm writing this all down partly in the hope that getting it out will help somehow, but also as a warning. If you ever hear rumors of strange caves or doorways to other realms, stay away. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Some questions are better left unanswered. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I can feel the walls closing in. The shadows are growing longer, the noises louder. I'm afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what I might see when I open them again. If anyone reading this has had similar experiences or knows anything about what might be happening to me, please reach out. I'm desperate for any help or insight. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. And Sky, if by some miracle you're out there somewhere and you see this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't find you. I'm sorry I might have made things worse. I love you, sis. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. As for me, I don't think I'll ever know peace again. The cave took that from me, along with my sister and my sanity. All I can do now is wait and watch the shadows, wondering which one will finally reach out to claim me. I've been a park ranger in the Appalachians for over 5 years now, but I'll never forget my first encounter with something I can't explain. It happened during my training, when I was still green and naive about what really lurks in these woods. It was a crisp autumn day, and I was shadowing Wade, one of the senior rangers, on what was supposed to be a routine search and rescue. A hiker had gone missing near Slither Ridge a couple days prior. We figured he'd just gotten turned around and needed help getting back to the trailhead. As we hiked deeper into the wilderness, Wade started telling me stories about strange things he'd seen over the years. Unexplained noises in the night, eerie shadows moving through the trees, campsites found torn apart as if by some massive animal. I laughed it off at first. Surely he was just trying to spook the new guy. But then we came across the missing hiker's campsite, or what was left of it. The tent was shredded, supplies scattered everywhere, and the smell. God, that rancid smell of death hit me like a punch to the gut. Wade motioned for me to stay back as he investigated. When he emerged from the wreckage, his face was ashen. "We need to call this in," he said grimly. "There's a body. What's left of it anyway?" I felt the blood drain from my face. This was way beyond anything I'd been prepared for. As Wade radioed for backup, I caught glimpses of what was in that tent. Torn flesh, splintered bone. It was like something had literally ripped that poor hiker apart. What could have done this?" I stammered. Wade's eyes met mine, deadly serious. "Something that ain't supposed to exist, kid. We call 'em skinwalkers round these parts." He went on to explain. Skinwalkers were shape-shifting creatures from Native American lore, humans who had gained the ability to transform into animals through dark magic. But the versions lurking in these mountains were even more twisted and feral. They can mimic human voices, Wade said. Use them to lure in prey. Had an encounter myself about 10 years back. Heard what sounded like a little girl crying for help deep in the woods. Followed the sound and came face to face with, well, I still ain't sure what it was exactly. Looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Its limbs were all twisted up, skin hanging off in places, and those eyes, empty black pits staring right through me. A chill ran down my spine as he recounted barely escaping with his life that night. Part of me still wanted to believe it was just a tall tale, but the gruesome scene in front of us was all too real. It took hours for the other rangers and local police to arrive. By then, dusk was falling, and an uneasy quiet had settled over the woods. As they cordoned off the area and began their investigation, Wade pulled me aside. Listen up, kid. There's things out here the higher-ups don't want the public knowing about. Keeps people from panicking, keeps the tourism dollars flowing. But us rangers, we gotta be prepared. You stick with me, I'll teach you how to survive out here. Over the next few weeks, Wade showed me all the tricks. How to spot signs of skinwalker activity, how to mask our scent, what deterrents worked best. Silver and certain herbs seemed effective. Fire was our best weapon against them. We investigated more disappearances, always keeping things quiet. Sometimes we'd find mutilated bodies, other times no trace at all. The skinwalkers were getting bolder, venturing closer to popular trails and campsites. Wade was convinced they had a nest somewhere near Sulphur Crater up on Slither Ridge. Said that's where the attacks seemed to be radiating out from. After another hiker went missing, he decided it was time to take action. We're gonna find that nest and burn it to the ground, he told me grimly one morning. It's the only way to stop this for good. I was terrified, but I knew he was right. We gathered a small team, just Wade, myself, and 2 other experienced rangers named Herb and Mike, loaded up with silver, accelerants, and enough firepower to take down a small army. The hike up to Sulphur Crater was tense. Every snapping twig made me flinch. The usual forest sounds seemed muted, as if the very woods were holding their breath. As we neared the crater, an overpowering stench of rot and decay filled the air. Wade signaled for us to spread out and approach quietly. That's when we heard it, a cacophony of inhuman shrieks and growls echoing from the crater. My blood ran cold as we peered over the rim. The crater floor was crawling with things, dozens of them. Some looked vaguely human. Others were warped animal-like forms. Many were horrific hybrids, misshapen creatures with too many limbs, multiple heads, or features that seemed to constantly shift and change. For a moment, we all just stared in shock and revulsion. Then one of the creatures looked up and locked eyes with me. Its face split into a Glasgow grin filled with needle-sharp teeth. It let out an ear-piercing shriek that alerted the others. "Now!" Wade yelled, lobbing the first Molotov cocktail into the mass of writhing bodies below. All hell broke loose. We rained down fire and bullets as the skinwalkers swarmed up the crater walls towards us. The sounds they made, Christ, I still hear them in my nightmares. Agonized howls mixed with perfectly mimicked human screams for help. I lost track of how long we fought. Minutes or hours, I couldn't say. My world narrowed to the roar of gunfire and the nauseating stench of burning flesh. I watched in horror as Mike was dragged screaming into the inferno below. We were overwhelmed, ammunition running low. That's when Wade made the call. He pulled out a bundle of dynamite, a last resort we'd brought just in case. "You get out of here, kid," he shouted over the chaos. "Herb and I will hold 'em off and blow this whole goddamn place sky high." I wanted to argue, to stay and fight, But one look in Wade's eyes told me there was no changing his mind. With a final nod of respect to the man who'd taught me so much, I turned and ran. The explosion rocked the entire mountain. I was knocked off my feet, ears ringing. When I finally stumbled back to the crater's edge, all that remained was a smoldering pit. No sign of Wade, Herb, or the skinwalkers. I made my way back to base in a daze, still processing everything that had happened. The official report called it a forest fire caused by careless campers. The missing hikers were never found. It's been years now, and I've been promoted to full ranger status. Part of my job is training the new recruits, teaching them not just standard procedures, but how to survive the true dangers lurking in these woods. I often wonder if we really wiped out all the skinwalkers that day. Sometimes I catch glimpses of strange shadows from the corner of my eye, or hear odd noises in the night that send chills down my spine. All I know is that I'll never take these forests for granted again. So, a word of warning to anyone venturing into the Appalachian wilderness. Stick to the marked trails. Don't go out alone. And if you hear someone calling for help deep in the woods, for God's sake, don't follow the voice. It all started about 2 years into my time here. I was doing a routine patrol deep in the backcountry, an area rarely visited by tourists. The forest was eerily quiet that day. No birds chirping, no rustling in the underbrush. The silence put me on edge. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I came face to face with the largest black bear I'd ever seen. But something was off about it. Its fur was patchy and mangy, with strange growths protruding from its skin. And its eyes, they glowed with an unnatural yellow light. I froze, heart pounding. The bear reared up on its hind legs, easily 9 feet tall. But instead of the typical roar, it let out a shrill, almost human-like scream. I fumbled for my bear spray, but before I could use it, the creature dropped back down and lumbered off into the forest. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely radio it in. When I described the encounter to my supervisor, he brushed it off as a bear with mange or tumors. But I knew what I saw. That thing wasn't natural, and it was just the beginning. Over the next few months, I started noticing other oddities. Deer with grotesque tumors and extra limbs, coyotes with glowing red eyes. Once, I could have sworn I saw a mountain lion walking on its hind legs like a person. But nothing compared to what happened last summer. I was leading an overnight backpacking trip with a small group of tourists. We'd hiked about 8 miles into a remote valley and set up camp for the night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to one of the campers screaming. I burst out of my tent to find pure chaos. Strange, chittering noises filled the air as dark shapes darted between the trees. The other campers were scrambling to get out of their tents. In the dim moonlight, I caught glimpses of something. They were about the size of a large dog, but moved in a bizarrely fluid way, almost like they were made of shadow. Their eyes glowed an eerie blue. As I watched in horror, one of them pounced on a camper, knocking him to the ground. His screams were cut short as the creature seemed to melt into him. Within seconds, the man stood up, but his movements were jerky and unnatural. His eyes had that same blue glow. I yelled for everyone to run and started firing my gun into the air, hoping the noise would scare the creatures off. We fled through the dark forest, stumbling and tripping. I could hear inhuman shrieks and pounding footsteps behind us. Somehow, we made it to a Forest Service road where I was able to call for an emergency evacuation. When we got back to Ranger HQ, I tried to explain what happened. But the higher-ups dismissed it as mass hysteria triggered by a bear attack. They claimed the camper who was taken over had simply hit his head in the chaos. I knew they were lying, covering something up. But what could I do? Since that night, I've been quietly investigating on my own. I've discovered that these incidents go back decades. There are old reports buried in the archives of hikers gone missing, of strange lights in the sky, of campers driven mad by unexplainable encounters. And then there are the stairs. I'd heard whispers about them from other rangers, but I thought it was just a creepy campfire story. Random staircases appearing in the middle of the wilderness, perfectly preserved despite the elements. I laughed it off, until I saw one with my own eyes. It was during a search and rescue operation for a missing hiker. We were combing a densely forested area when I stumbled into a small clearing, and there it was, a pristine wooden staircase, about 20 steps high, leading to nowhere. It looked like it had been plucked from an old Victorian home and dropped in the middle of the forest. The wood wasn't weathered at all, and there wasn't a speck of moss or lichen on it. Every instinct told me to stay away, but I found myself drawn to it. As I approached, I felt a strange buzzing in my head, like static electricity. The air around the staircase seemed to shimmer and distort. I put my foot on the first step and immediately felt nauseous and dizzy. A sense of overwhelming dread washed over me. I stumbled back, gasping for air. When I turned to call the other rangers over, the staircase had vanished, just gone, like it was never there. I've never told anyone about that incident. They'd think I was crazy, but I know what I saw, and I know there's something seriously wrong in this park. The weirdest part is, despite all the strange occurrences, the disappearances, the unexplainable phenomena, tourists keep flooding in. It's like the park has some kind of hold over people, drawing them in despite the dangers. I've thought about quitting, believe me, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm here for a reason, that maybe I can help protect people from whatever is out there. So I stay, patrolling the trails, always on alert for the next impossible thing. Sometimes at night, when the forest is quiet and dark, I swear I can hear those chittering noises again, and in the distance, faint blue lights dance between the trees. I tell myself it's just fireflies or my imagination, but deep down, I know better. There are things in these woods that defy explanation, things that shouldn't exist, and I'm one of the few people who know the truth. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe I just need to get it off my chest. Maybe I'm hoping someone out there has seen similar things and can help me make sense of it all. Or maybe I'm just going crazy. But I know what I've experienced is real, and I have a feeling it's only going to get stranger from here. So if you're planning a trip to Appalachian National Park, be careful. Stick to the marked trails, don't go out alone, and whatever you do, if you see a random staircase in the woods, stay far, far away. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I never thought I'd be so anxious about plumbing, but here I am, lying awake at 3 a.m., my mind racing with thoughts of what lurks beneath our quiet suburban streets. It all started last week when the City Council announced plans to connect our neighborhood to the municipal sewer system. On the surface, it seemed like a routine infrastructure upgrade. But for someone like me, who's always had an overactive imagination, it opened up a whole new realm of possibilities, and not the good kind. You see, our little community has always relied on septic tanks. It's been that way for generations. We're a bit removed from the hustle and bustle of the city, and honestly, I've always liked it that way. There's something comforting about knowing exactly where your waste goes, as gross as that might sound. But now, with this new plan, We'll be connected to miles and miles of underground tunnels, stretching who knows where. I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling, so I started doing some research. Big mistake. I stumbled upon forums filled with urban legends about sewer systems, stories of workers encountering things they couldn't explain, of strange noises echoing through the pipes, of people going missing and being found in the most unlikely places underground. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but once those thoughts take root, it's hard to get them out. Last night, I woke up to a strange gurgling sound coming from our bathroom. It was probably nothing, just old pipes settling or something. But in my half-awake state, my mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusions. What if something was trying to come up through the pipes? What if connecting to the city's sewer system was like opening a door to some unknown underworld? I got up, my heart pounding, and slowly made my way to the bathroom. The sound had stopped, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow move across the mirror. I flicked on the light, and everything looked normal. Too normal, almost. I found myself staring at the drain, wondering what secrets it might soon be connected to. This morning, I couldn't help but notice the work crews setting up at the end of our street. They were cheerful, joking around as they prepared to start digging. If only they knew the dread they were instilling in me. I wanted to warn them, to tell them to be careful, but I knew I'd sound crazy. So I just watched from behind my curtains, imagining what they might uncover once they start breaking ground. Throughout the day, the sounds of construction filled the air. The constant rumble of heavy machinery became a sinister backdrop to my mounting anxiety. Every now and then, I'd hear a loud clang or a worker shouting, and I'd jump, wondering if they'd discovered something they weren't prepared for. As evening approached, the workers packed up for the day, leaving behind a maze of orange cones and caution tape. I found myself drawn to the edge of the excavation site. The hole they dug wasn't very deep yet, but it was enough to make me shudder. I stood there staring into the darkness, half expecting to see something staring back. That's when I noticed a strange odor. It wasn't the typical smell of dirt and machinery. This was something older, mustier, like the air from a long-sealed tomb. I took a step back, my imagination running wild. What if the sewer connection was just a cover story? What if they were actually uncovering something that had been deliberately buried long ago? I hurried home, locking the door behind me. I tried to distract myself with TV, but every commercial break seemed to feature ads for plumbing services or cleaning products. It was like the universe was taunting me, reminding me of what was to come. As night fell, the sounds outside changed. The distant hum of traffic faded, replaced by an eerie silence. But if I listened closely, I could swear I heard something else. A faint, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, coming from the direction of the construction site. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe some equipment left running. But deep down, I knew better. I tossed and turned all night, plagued by vivid nightmares. In one, I was lost in a labyrinth of tunnels, the walls dripping with some unidentifiable slime. In another, I was being chased by shadowy figures that seemed to melt in and out of the pipes around me. Each time I woke up, drenched in sweat, I had to remind myself that it wasn't real, at least not yet. The next morning, I overheard my neighbors chatting excitedly about the sewer project. They were talking about improved property values and lower utility bills. How could they be so blind to the potential dangers? I wanted to shake them, to make them see what I saw. But I held my tongue, knowing they'd just think I was losing it. As I walked to my car, I noticed something odd. There was a strange mark on the sidewalk, right where the workers had been digging yesterday. It looked almost like a handprint, but elongated and distorted with too many fingers. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At work, I couldn't focus. Every time someone flushed a toilet or ran a faucet, I flinched. During my lunch break, I found myself Googling sewer horror stories and underground city legends. I knew I was only feeding my fears, but I couldn't stop. Each article, each forum post, seemed to confirm my worst suspicions. On my way home, I decided to take a detour past the construction site. The hole was significantly deeper now, and I could see the beginnings of large pipes being laid. As I watched, one of the workers climbed out of the pit, looking pale and shaken. I overheard him telling his colleague that he'd heard something down there, something that sounded like whispers. His friend laughed it off, blaming it on echoes or the wind, but I knew better. I'd been expecting this. That night, the noises from my bathroom got louder. It wasn't just gurgling anymore. Now it sounded like scratching, like something was trying to claw its way up through the pipes. I sat on my bed, every muscle tense, listening. Part of me wanted to investigate, to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But a bigger part was terrified of what I might find. As the night wore on, the scratching turned into a soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It had a rhythm to it, almost like Morse code. Was something trying to communicate? I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to make sense of it. For a moment, I thought I heard a voice, muffled and distorted, calling my name. I jerked back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my windows. The noises had stopped, and for a moment I wondered if I had dreamed it all. But then I saw it, a trail of wet footprints leading from my bathroom to the bedroom door. They weren't human footprints. They were long and misshapen, with strange protrusions that could have been claws. I followed the trail with my eyes, my breath catching in my throat. It ended abruptly at my closed bedroom door. Whatever had made those prints had been standing there, watching me sleep. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place. Slowly, hesitantly, I approached the door. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I took a deep breath and yanked it open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The footprints were gone too, evaporated in the morning light. I let out a shaky laugh, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild again. But deep down, I knew. Something had changed. The barrier between our world and whatever lurked in those underground tunnels was thinning. As I write this, I can hear the construction crews outside getting closer to my house every day. Soon, they'll be connecting our pipes to the main sewer line. And when they do, I fear it won't just be water and waste flowing through those tunnels. We're opening a door, inviting something in. And I don't think we're prepared for what might accept that invitation. I know how this sounds. I know most people would tell me I'm being irrational, that I need to get a grip. But I can't shake this feeling of impending doom. Every drain, every pipe, now feels like a potential portal to something sinister. I find myself avoiding the bathroom, using public restrooms whenever possible. I've even started stockpiling bottled water, afraid to drink from the tap. Tonight, as I lay here listening to the wind howl outside, I can't help but wonder, am I the only one who senses what's coming? Are my neighbors really so oblivious, or are they just better at hiding their fears? Either way, I know I won't sleep soundly until this sewer project is complete. And even then, I'll always be listening, always wondering what might be making its way up through the pipes, inching closer with every flush, every shower, every drop of water down the drain. So if you're reading this, consider it a warning. Pay attention to the sounds in your pipes. Watch for strange marks or unexplained puddles. And most importantly, remember that sometimes progress comes at a price. We might think we're just upgrading our infrastructure, but we could be inviting something ancient and malevolent into our homes. Something that's been waiting patiently underground, biding its time until we foolishly open the door. At first I was hesitant. The thought of crawling through dark, damp tunnels filled with who knows what didn't exactly appeal to me. But Jake and Mike were pumped about the idea, talking about how cool it would be to see a hidden side of our town that no one else gets to experience. After some persuading and a few beers, I reluctantly agreed to go along with their plan. We waited until it was fully dark outside before sneaking out to the entrance of the storm drain near the old abandoned factory on the edge of town. The rusty grate covering the opening was loose, and Jake was able to pry it off pretty easily. As we shined our flashlights into the gaping black hole, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about it just felt wrong. But I pushed the feeling aside, not wanting to seem like a wuss in front of my friends. One by one, we climbed down into the drain. The smell hit me immediately. A dank, musty odor mixed with something I couldn't quite place. Our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as we made our way deeper into the tunnel system. Water trickled by our feet, and I tried not to think about what else might be in it. At first, it was kind of cool in an eerie way. The graffiti on the walls, the strange echoes, the sense of being somewhere we weren't supposed to be, it gave me an adrenaline rush. We came to a junction where the tunnel split off in different directions and decided to take the path that seemed to lead towards the center of town. As we went further, though, things started to feel off. The air got thicker and harder to breathe. The echoes changed, sounding distorted and unnatural. And I could have sworn I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, only for there to be nothing there when I turned to look. "Guys, maybe we should head back," I said nervously. But Jake and Mike were caught up in the excitement of exploration and brushed off my concerns. So we pressed on. That's when things got really weird. We rounded a corner and found ourselves in a large circular chamber. But instead of more concrete tunnels, we were surrounded by what looked like flesh. The walls pulsed and undulated, covered in a slimy sheen. Strange growths protruded from various spots, twitching occasionally. I froze in horror, unable to process what I was seeing. Jake and Mike seemed equally stunned. "What the fuck?" Mike whispered. Before any of us could react further, I felt something wrap around my ankle. I looked down to see a rope-like tendril emerging from the floor, quickly coiling up my leg. I screamed and tried to pull away, but its grip was incredibly strong. More tendrils shot out, grabbing onto Jake and Mike. We all yelled and struggled, but it was like fighting against steel cables. The tendrils began dragging us towards the fleshy walls. In a panic, I managed to pull out my pocket knife and started hacking at the tendril on my leg. After what felt like an eternity, I finally cut through it. Without hesitating, I rushed to help Jake and Mike, slashing at the things holding them. We ran as fast as we could back the way we came, slipping and sliding on the wet concrete. I could hear a strange rumbling sound behind us, like something massive was shifting and moving. We didn't stop to look back. When we finally emerged from the drain, gasping for fresh air, we were all shaking and covered in slime. We stumbled back to Jake's house in shocked silence, trying to process what we'd just experienced. Over the next few days, we tried to convince ourselves it had just been some kind of shared hallucination. Maybe someone had pumped some kind of gas into the tunnels that made us see things. Maybe we'd stumbled onto some kind of secret government experiment. We came up with all kinds of explanations, but deep down we knew the truth. Something unnatural and horrifying was living beneath our town. We made a pact to never speak of what happened to anyone else. Who would believe us anyway? But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that rumbling sound in the distance, and I wonder what's really down there in the darkness beneath our feet, slowly growing and spreading through the tunnels like cancer. I haven't been able to look at a storm drain the same way since. Every time I pass one on the street, I shudder thinking about what might be lurking just out of sight. Part of me wants to warn people, to tell them about the danger hiding right under their noses. But who would listen? Who would take me seriously? So I keep the secret, along with Jake and Mike. We don't talk about it, but I can see in their eyes that they're haunted by it too. Sometimes I wonder if we should have told someone, if we should have tried to do something about whatever that was down there. But then I remember the feeling of those tendrils wrapping around me, pulling me towards that pulsing, fleshy wall. And I know we made the right choice in running away. I still have nightmares about it. In my dreams, I'm back in that chamber, but this time I can't escape. The tendrils drag me into the wall, and I feel myself being absorbed into it, becoming part of whatever twisted alien thing was growing down there. I always wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing. Since that night, I've done some research on the town's history, looking for any clues about what we might have encountered. I found some old newspaper articles about people going missing over the years, last seen near storm drains or manholes. The official explanations were always accidents or runaways, but now I wonder if there was more to those disappearances. I've also noticed strange things around town that I never paid attention to before. Weird growths on the sides of buildings near drainage pipes, odd smells wafting up from sewer grates, unusual stains on the street that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. It's like once I saw behind the curtain, I can't stop seeing signs of it everywhere. Jake and Mike have changed too. Jake's become paranoid, always looking over his shoulder and avoiding going out at night. Mike's thrown himself into researching conspiracy theories and fringe science, convinced that what we saw was evidence of some kind of interdimensional invasion. As for me, I'm just trying to live my life as normally as possible. But I can't shake the feeling that we stumbled onto something huge that night, something beyond our comprehension. And I'm terrified that someday, whatever is down there in the tunnels will find its way to the surface. I don't know why I'm sharing this story now. Maybe I just needed to get it off my chest. Maybe part of me is hoping that someone out there has had a similar experience and can help make sense of it all. Or maybe I'm hoping that by putting this out into the world, it will somehow protect me if that thing ever comes looking for me. All I know is that I'll never look at the world the same way again. There are things out there beyond our understanding, hiding in the dark places we never think to look. And sometimes, ignorance really is bliss, because once you've seen behind the veil, you can never truly unsee it. So if you're reading this and feeling the urge to go urban exploring or check out your local storm drains, take my advice. Don't. Some things are better left undiscovered. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and some secrets are meant to stay buried deep underground, hidden from the light of day. Because trust me, there are horrors lurking in the shadows that will haunt you for the rest of your life. I know, because I've seen them, and I'd give anything to be able to forget. I still remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it's been years. I was working as a maintenance technician for the city's sewer system, a job I'd had for about 5 years at that point. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and I actually enjoyed the solitude sometimes. That particular day started like any other. I got my assignment from dispatch. There was a blockage reported in one of the older sections of the sewer network downtown. Pretty routine stuff. I gathered my gear, climbed down into the access tunnel, and made my way through the dimly lit concrete passages. The further I went, the older the infrastructure got. The walls changed from smooth concrete to rough brick, and the passages got narrower. The air felt thick and damp, with that signature sewer stench that you never really get used to. My headlamp cut through the gloom, casting long shadows as I splashed through ankle-deep water. After about 20 minutes of walking, I reached the section where the blockage was reported. I started my inspection, shining my light along the walls and ceiling, looking for any obvious signs of damage or buildup. That's when I noticed something odd. There was a small side passage I didn't remember being on the schematics. It was maybe 3 feet high, barely big enough to crawl through. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a quick look. I mean, what if the blockage was coming from there? I got down on my hands and knees and started crawling. The passage was tight, with slimy brick walls pressing in on both sides. After about 10 feet, it opened up into a small chamber, maybe 8 feet across. I stood up, stretching my back, and swept my light around. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a crumbling pillar, was something. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but as I focused my light, I realized I was looking at a figure, a human-shaped figure, but wrong. It was tall, probably close to 7 feet, and impossibly thin. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles, but the worst part was its head, or rather, the lack of one. Where a head should have been, there was just nothing, an empty space above the shoulders. I stood there, frozen in shock and disbelief. This couldn't be real. I must be seeing things, I thought. Maybe there were fumes down here messing with my mind. I blinked hard, expecting the figure to disappear, but it didn't. Instead, it moved. It was just a slight shift at first, barely perceptible. Then, with a jerky, unsettling motion, it turned towards me. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt its attention fix on me like a physical weight. Panic exploded in my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling hard on my ass. My headlamp flew off, clattering across the floor and plunging the chamber into darkness. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then, a sound. A low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It grew in intensity, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to get away. I felt something brush against my arm, cold and impossibly smooth. I yelled, more in surprise than pain, and lunged for where I thought the exit was. My hands found the opening, and I threw myself into the narrow passage. I crawled faster than I ever thought possible, scraping my knees and elbows raw on the rough bricks. Behind me I could hear something, a scraping, slithering sound, like something large trying to squeeze through the tight space. I burst out of the passage, stumbling to my feet. Without thinking, I ran. I ran through the twisting sewer tunnels, splashing through water and slipping on slime-covered bricks. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, I saw daylight ahead. I emerged from the access tunnel, blinking in the sudden brightness. I must have looked a sight, covered in filth, bleeding from dozens of scrapes, wild-eyed and panting. My co-workers found me there, slumped against the wall of the access shaft. They thought I'd had some kind of accident down there. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what really happened. Who would believe me? I took a week off work after that, claiming I'd gotten sick from the sewer fumes. When I went back, I requested a transfer to above-ground maintenance. I couldn't bear the thought of going back down there. For months afterward, I had nightmares about that figure, about its impossible shape, the empty space where its head should have been. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear that low, vibrating hum. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, my mind playing tricks on me in the dark, claustrophobic environment. Maybe those old brick tunnels were full of toxic fumes that caused hallucinations. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. I've done research since then, trying to make sense of it all. I've found stories, whispered accounts of others who've seen similar things. Maintenance workers, urban explorers, even some homeless people who shelter in the storm drains. They talk about creatures glimpsed in the shadows, figures that don't quite look human, presences felt but not seen. Some call them liminal entities, beings that exist in the spaces between, neither fully here nor there. The more I read, the more convinced I become that there's something down there in the darkness beneath our feet, something that doesn't belong to our world. I still work for the city, but I'll never go back into those tunnels. Sometimes when I'm walking downtown, I'll pass a manhole cover and feel a chill run down my spine. I can't help but wonder, what's down there, lurking just out of sight? And what happens when it decides to come up to our world? I don't have answers. All I know is that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows, in the spaces we rarely look, and once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. They change you, make you question everything you thought you knew about reality. So next time you're walking down the street and hear a strange sound coming from a storm drain, or feel an inexplicable chill as you pass a dark alley, just remember, there might be more to this world than we can see or understand, and some things are better left in the dark. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. It's been 3 years, but the memories are as vivid as ever. I was working as a sewer maintenance technician for the city, a job I'd had for about 5 years at that point. It wasn't glamorous work by any means, but it paid the bills, and I actually enjoyed the solitude sometimes. That particular day started off like any other. I got my assignments for the day. There was a section of the old tunnels downtown that needed inspection and minor repairs. Pretty routine stuff. I gathered my gear, threw on my protective suit, and headed down into the depths below the city streets. The first few hours were uneventful. I made my way through the dank, dimly lit tunnels, checking for cracks or blockages and making small fixes here and there. The smell was as foul as ever, but you get used to it after a while. It was around noon when things started to feel off. I can't really explain it, but there was suddenly this sense of unease creeping over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off, probably just my imagination getting the better of me in the gloomy tunnels. But the feeling persisted and even intensified as I continued on. I rounded a bend in the tunnel and stopped dead in my tracks. There, about 20 feet ahead of me, was what looked like a person. But something was very wrong. They were unnaturally tall and thin, easily 7 feet if not more, and they were just standing there, perfectly still, facing away from me. My heart started racing and I broke out in a cold sweat. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen in place. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, I managed to find my voice. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "Are you all right? You shouldn't be down here, it's not safe." Slowly, so slowly, the figure began to turn. I'll never forget the primal fear that gripped me in that moment. As it rotated to face me, I realized with growing horror that what I was seeing wasn't human at all. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. The skin was a sickly pale gray color that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. But it was the face that made me want to scream. Where there should have been eyes, nose, and mouth was just smooth, featureless skin. I stumbled backwards, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as my hands shook. The creature took a step towards me, moving with a jerky, unsettling gait. That was enough to finally snap me out of my paralysis. I turned and ran faster than I ever had in my life. My heart was pounding in my ears as I sprinted through the tunnels. I could hear it behind me, a rhythmic slapping sound as its bare feet hit the wet concrete. It was gaining on me. In my panic, I took a wrong turn and found myself in a dead end. Frantically, I spun around, pressed my back against the wall. It was there, at the entrance to the alcove, blocking my escape. For a moment we just stood there, facing each other. Then it started to make this horrible keening noise, high-pitched and inhuman. The sound filled my head, drowning out everything else. I don't know how long I stood there, hands clamped over my ears, eyes squeezed shut. When I finally opened them again, it was gone. Just vanished. I sank to the ground, shaking uncontrollably and gasping for breath in the fetid air. It took me a long time to gather the courage to move. When I finally did, I ran out of those tunnels as fast as I could. I burst out of a manhole onto a busy street, covered in filth and wild-eyed. People stared as I stumbled past them, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from there as possible. I quit my job that same day, told my boss I was done, couldn't do it anymore. He tried to talk me out of it, but I was adamant. I think he could tell from my shell-shocked expression that something had happened down there. For weeks afterwards, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that featureless face. I jumped at every sound, convinced it had somehow followed me home. I started drinking heavily, just to quiet the thoughts racing through my mind. It was about a month later that I first came across an online forum for people who had similar experiences. Reading their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others who had encountered things in underground spaces. Maintenance workers, urban explorers, even a few unlucky individuals who had stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. We formed a sort of support group, sharing our experiences and helping each other cope. It was through them that I learned about the larger pattern. These encounters seemed to be happening more frequently, and almost always in older sections of tunnel systems beneath major cities. Some of the stories were eerily similar to mine. Others described different entities. Some spoke of strange lights, others of disembodied voices or a feeling of time distortion. But the common thread was the overwhelming sense of wrongness, of encountering something that should not exist in our world. Slowly, with the help of the group, I started to heal. The nightmares became less frequent, though they never went away entirely. I found a new job, something that kept me far away from any underground spaces. But I never stopped looking over my shoulder, never stopped feeling like I was being watched. I still don't know what I saw that day. Was it some kind of undiscovered subterranean creature? An interdimensional being? a hallucination brought on by toxic fumes? I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I'm no closer to an answer. What I do know is that there's more going on beneath our feet than most people realize. The tunnels and caverns that honeycomb the earth below our cities hold secrets and dangers that we can scarcely imagine. I often wonder how many others have had similar encounters but were too afraid or embarrassed to speak up. How many unexplained disappearances or cases of sudden onset mental illness might be attributed to these underground horrors? Sometimes I'm tempted to go back down there to try and find answers. But then I remember the soul-chilling terror of that day, the sound of those inhuman footsteps echoing behind me, and I know I can never return to the depths. All I can do is share my story and hope that it reaches others who have experienced similar things, to let them know they're not alone, and to warn those who might be at risk. If you work in underground spaces or enjoy urban exploration, please be careful. There are things down there in the dark that defy explanation, things that can break your mind if you're unlucky enough to encounter them. As for me, I'm trying to move on with my life as best I can, but I know I'll never be the same. That brief encounter changed me forever, left me with scars both seen and unseen. And always, there's that nagging fear in the back of my mind. What if it's still down there, waiting? What if one day it finds its way to the surface? I pray I never have to find out the answer to those questions. But in my darkest moments, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over, that somehow, someday, I'll come face to face with that horror again. And I don't know if I'll be strong enough to survive a second time. I never thought much about the old junk in my grandma's basement until that day. I was helping her clean out some boxes, going through dusty old knickknacks and faded photographs. That's when I found the ring. It was tucked away in a small wooden box, nestled in some crumpled tissue paper. As soon as I saw it, I was transfixed. The ring was made of tarnished silver, shaped like a dragon coiled around itself. Its eyes were tiny red gems that seemed to glint even in the dim light of the basement. "Oh, that old thing," my grandma said when I showed it to her. "I don't even remember where that came from. Probably some yard sale years ago. You can keep it if you want." I slipped it onto my finger, surprised at how perfectly it fit. The metal felt unusually warm against my skin. As I turned my hand, admiring how the dragon's scales caught the light, I felt a strange dizziness come over me. The basement seemed to tilt and blur around me. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the basement anymore. I was standing in a forest clearing, surrounded by towering pines. The air was crisp and clean, with none of the musty basement smell. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the canopy above. For a moment, I thought I must be dreaming. I pinched myself hard, but nothing changed. The forest around me felt utterly real. I could feel the soft earth beneath my feet, hear birds chirping in the distance. I looked down at my hand, and the dragon ring was still there. But now it was gleaming like new, the silver bright and untarnished. The tiny ruby eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly. My voice echoed through the trees. "Is anyone there?" There was no response, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I started walking, figuring I'd eventually hit a road or find some sign of civilization. But after what felt like hours of aimless wandering, I'd seen nothing but endless forest. Just as panic was starting to set in, I heard something, a sort of rhythmic thumping sound coming from somewhere ahead. I moved towards it cautiously. As I got closer, I realized it was the sound of hoofbeats. A horse? Out here? I pushed through a thick tangle of bushes and found myself at the edge of another clearing. What I saw there made me freeze in my tracks. It was a horse, all right, but not like any horse I'd ever seen. This one was pure white, with a silvery mane that seemed to shimmer and flow like water. And sprouting from its forehead was a long, spiraling horn. A unicorn. An honest-to-God unicorn. I must have made some sound of shock, because the creature's head whipped around to look at me. Its eyes were a deep, mesmerizing blue. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then it spoke. Not out loud, but directly into my mind somehow. "You don't belong here, ring-bearer," it said. Its mental voice was musical, but tinged with wariness. "How did you come to this realm?" I held up my hand, showing the ring. I don't know," I stammered. "I put this on, and suddenly I was here." "Where is here exactly?" The unicorn stamped a hoof impatiently. "You are in Alindra, the realm of Fae and magic. That ring you wear is no mere trinket. It is an artifact of great power, a key between worlds. You must return to your own realm at once. It is not safe for mortals here." As if to emphasize its point, an eerie howl echoed through the forest. The unicorn's ears flattened against its head. "The wild hunt approaches," it said urgently. "You must go now. Focus on your home, on returning. The ring will guide you." I closed my eyes, picturing my grandma's basement. I thought of the musty smell, the piles of boxes, the creaky steps. I felt that dizzying sensation again, the world seeming to tilt and spin around me. When I opened my eyes, I was back. The basement looked exactly as it had before. My grandma was still sorting through a box nearby, seemingly unaware that anything had happened. I looked down at the ring. It was tarnished and old-looking again, the ruby eyes dull. Had I imagined it all? But then I noticed something clutched in my other hand, a long silvery hair, a unicorn's hair. It sparkled faintly in the dim light. I quickly stuffed it in my pocket before my grandma could see. My heart was racing. What had just happened to me? Where had I really been? I helped my grandma finish cleaning, my mind whirling the whole time. As soon as I got home, I started researching. I looked up everything I could find about magical rings, portals between worlds, the wild hunt, unicorns, anything that might explain what I'd experienced. Most of what I found was obviously fiction or New Age nonsense. But buried in obscure forums and ancient mythology, I found hints and whispers. Stories of people stumbling into other realms, legends of magical artifacts that could bridge worlds. I became obsessed. I spent every spare moment researching, trying to understand what had happened to me. I even tried to use the ring again, but nothing happened. It seemed like an ordinary piece of jewelry now. Weeks passed, then months. I started to wonder if I really had imagined it all. Maybe it was just some vivid daydream brought on by dust and dim lighting in that basement. But I couldn't let it go. The memory of that forest, the unicorn's voice in my mind, it all felt too real. And I still had that silvery hair hidden away in a small box in my desk drawer, proof that it wasn't all in my head. I became withdrawn, spending more and more time alone with my research. My friends stopped inviting me out. My grades started to slip. My parents were worried, but I couldn't explain it to them. They'd think I was crazy. Then one night, everything changed again. I was up late, poring over an old book on Celtic mythology I'd found in a used bookstore. My eyes were burning with fatigue, but I couldn't stop reading. Suddenly, I felt that now familiar dizziness wash over me. I looked down at my hand. The ring, which I'd taken to wearing constantly, was glowing faintly. The ruby eyes blazed like embers. The world tilted and blurred around me. This time, instead of a forest, I found myself in what looked like an ancient stone chamber. Flickering torches cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of incense. In the center of the room stood a figure in a hooded robe. It turned to face me, and I gasped. Where a face should have been, there was only swirling mist. "Welcome, Seeker," the figure said, its voice echoing strangely. "We have been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but no words would come. The figure gestured, and suddenly the chamber was filled with floating images. I saw scenes from history, ancient battles, great discoveries, moments of triumph and tragedy. But mixed in were things that couldn't be real. Dragons soaring over medieval castles, people wielding magic, creatures out of myth and legend. "All of this is real," the figure said, seeming to read my thoughts. "All worlds, all times, all possibilities exist together. The boundaries between them are thinner than most realize, and you, Seeker, have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" I managed to ask. "To walk between, to seek out the lost stories, the forgotten truths, to be a bridge between realms." The figure held out its hand. Floating above its palm was another ring, this one gold with a blue stone. "Take it," the figure said. "With this, you will be able to travel the paths between worlds at will. But beware, great power brings great danger. There are those who would use this ability for dark purposes. You must be vigilant." I hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the ring. As soon as I touched it, I felt that dizzying sensation again. The chamber faded away, and I found myself back in my room. Both rings were on my fingers now, the silver dragon and the gold with its blue stone. They felt warm against my skin, almost alive. I sat there for a long time, staring at the rings and trying to process what had just happened. Part of me still wondered if I was losing my mind, but a bigger part of me was filled with a sense of wonder and excitement. I had been chosen for something incredible. I could travel between worlds, discover lost stories, see things no one else could see. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. As the first light of dawn started to creep through my window, I made a decision. I would embrace this new role, whatever it meant. I would be careful, but I wouldn't shrink from it. I was a seeker now, and I had worlds to explore. I don't know what the future holds. I don't fully understand the power I've been given or the responsibility that comes with it. But I do know that my life will never be the same. Every object around me now holds the potential for mystery and magic. Every shadow might be a doorway to another world. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. Sometimes I wake up and think it must have been a dream, but then I feel the rings on my fingers, see that silvery unicorn hair in its box, and I know it's all real. I don't know why I was chosen for this. I'm nobody special, just a normal person who stumbled onto something extraordinary. But I intend to make the most of it, to learn, to explore, to bridge the gaps between worlds. If you're reading this, maybe you'll think I'm crazy. Maybe you'll write it off as an overactive imagination or some kind of delusion. That's okay. I wouldn't have believed it myself not too long ago. But keep your eyes open. Look closely at the world around you. You never know when you might find a doorway to somewhere incredible. And if you do, take a deep breath and step through. There are wonders waiting on the other side. There were 5 of us, me, Jake, Mia, Chris, and Alex. We'd all met through an online urban exploration forum and bonded over our shared love of adventure and uncovering the secret spaces beneath the city streets. As we gathered near the boarded-up entrance around midnight, I felt the familiar mix of excitement and nerves. We'd done our research and knew this tunnel system was massive, stretching for miles under the city. Jake pried off the boards and we slipped inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The musty smell of decay hit me immediately as we made our way down the crumbling stairs. At the bottom, rusted train tracks stretched endlessly in both directions, disappearing into inky blackness. We decided to head north, towards where we thought an old station platform might be. As we walked, our footsteps and voices echoed eerily off the tunnel walls. I tried to imagine what it must have been like decades ago when trains rumbled through here. Now it was like a tomb, silent and forgotten by the world above. We passed abandoned maintenance rooms and mysterious side passages, debating whether to explore them. In the end, we stuck to the main tunnel, not wanting to risk getting lost. After about 30 minutes of walking, we reached the old station platform. It was like stepping back in time. Faded advertisements still clung to the walls and rusted benches lined the platform. As we explored, taking photos and marveling at this hidden piece of history, I noticed something odd. There were strange symbols carved into one of the tiled walls, circles and squiggles that didn't look like graffiti. When I pointed them out to the others, Chris said they reminded him of occult sigils he'd seen online. That's when things started to get weird. As we were examining the symbols, all of our flashlights flickered and went out at the same time. We fumbled in the pitch darkness, trying to turn them back on. When they finally came back to life, the beam caught something moving in the shadows at the end of the platform. I could have sworn I saw a hunched, inhuman shape dart out of sight. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. The others nodded, looking as freaked out as I felt. We decided it was probably just a large rat or something and tried to laugh it off. But an uneasy feeling had settled over the group. We agreed to start heading back, no longer in the mood to explore further. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Every so often, I'd hear a skittering sound behind us, but when I'd whip around to look, there was nothing there. The others were on edge too. We walked in tense silence, jumping at every echo and shadow. About halfway back to the entrance, we heard a loud metallic bang from somewhere up ahead, like a heavy door slamming shut. We all froze, straining to listen. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural growling sound that definitely wasn't human or any animal I could identify. It was coming from the direction we needed to go to get out. Panic started to set in. We debated whether to go back to the station platform or press on towards the exit. In the end, we decided to keep going. We had no food or water, and our phone batteries were dying. We had to get out. We crept forward as quietly as possible, hearts pounding. The growling had stopped, but now we could hear what sounded like heavy footsteps and labored breathing echoing through the tunnel. It seemed to be moving away from us, towards the exit. Suddenly, Mia let out a blood-curdling scream. Something had brushed against her leg in the darkness. We shone our lights down but saw nothing. That's when the growling started again, but this time it was coming from right behind us. We ran. I've never run so fast in my life. We sprinted down the tunnel, the sound of multiple creatures in pursuit. I could hear claws scrabbling on the concrete and hot, fetid breath right behind me. Ahead, I saw a maintenance alcove and Dove inside, the others right behind me. We huddled there in terror as the things prowled just outside. In the dim light, I caught glimpses of pale, twisted bodies and glowing eyes. They snuffled and growled, trying to reach us. I was sure we were going to die. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, We heard chanting echoing through the tunnels. It was in some language I didn't recognize, but it made my skin crawl. The creatures outside the alcove went berserk, howling and throwing themselves at the entrance. And then, as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. The chanting stopped. The creatures vanished. We waited for what felt like hours, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, we gathered the courage to peer out. The tunnel was empty. Shaken to our core, we made our way to the exit as fast as we could. When we emerged into the cool night air, I've never been so grateful to see the sky. We went our separate ways quickly, too traumatized to talk about what had happened. In the days that followed, I scoured the internet for any information about the tunnels or similar experiences. I found vague references to occult rituals practiced in abandoned subway systems, but nothing concrete. The others refused to talk about that night. Chris and Mia have quit urban exploring altogether. I still have nightmares about what I saw and heard in those tunnels. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that unearthly growling outside my window. I don't know what those things were or who was performing those rituals. Part of me doesn't want to know. But I'll never forget the terror of that night when our urban exploration turned into a waking nightmare. I used to love uncovering the secret spaces of the city. Now I'm terrified of what might be hiding in the dark. My shift began at 6 a.m., and I met up with my coworker, Mike, at the entrance to one of the main sewer tunnels. We geared up with our protective suits, headlamps, and equipment, then descended into the damp darkness below. The smell hit me immediately, a putrid mix of waste and decay that made my stomach churn. But I steeled myself and pressed on, following Mike deeper into the labyrinth of pipes and channels. For the first few hours, it was just routine checks and minor repairs. We splashed through ankle-deep water, shining our lights along the curved walls, looking for cracks or blockages. The constant dripping echoes and scurrying of rats kept me on edge, but I tried to focus on the job at hand. It wasn't until we reached a junction of larger tunnels that things started to get weird. Mike stopped suddenly, holding up his hand for me to be quiet. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears but couldn't make out anything beyond the usual ambient sounds. He shook his head and motioned for us to keep moving, but I could tell he was spooked. As we continued on, I started to notice strange markings on the walls, symbols and crude drawings that didn't look like typical graffiti. Some of them seemed to glow faintly in the beam of my headlamp. I asked Mike about them, but he just grunted and said to ignore it. His terse response only heightened my unease. We turned down a narrower passage, and that's when I saw it, a flash of movement at the edge of my light. It was too big to be a rat, more like the size of a large dog, but it moved in a way that sent chills down my spine. Fluid and unnatural. I called out to Mike, but when I turned to look at him, his face had gone pale. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice tight with fear. "Now." We started to backtrack, moving as quickly as we could through the slick tunnels. That's when we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from all around us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a primal urge to run. Mike broke into a sprint, and I followed close behind. The splashing of our boots through the water echoed off the walls, mixing with our ragged breathing and the increasingly loud growls behind us. I dared a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. In the dim light, I saw multiple shapes moving in the shadows, their eyes glowing an unnatural green. We rounded a corner and came face to face with a dead end. Mike cursed and started frantically searching the walls for a way out. I joined him, my hands shaking as I ran them over the slimy bricks. The growls were getting closer, and I could hear the splash of heavy footsteps approaching. Just as I was about to give up hope, Mike found a rusty ladder leading up to a manhole cover. We scrambled up it, our hearts pounding in our chests. I could feel hot breath on my heels as Mike struggled with the cover above us. With a final burst of strength, he pushed it open, and we tumbled out onto the street above. We lay there on the pavement, gasping for air and trembling with adrenaline. Passers-by gave us strange looks, but I didn't care. We were alive, and that's all that mattered. When we finally caught our breath, Mike turned to me with a haunted look in his eyes. "You can't tell anyone about this," he said. "They won't believe you, and even if they did, it would only make things worse." I nodded, still too shaken to speak. As we made our way back to the maintenance office, Mike filled me in on what he knew. He'd been working in the sewers for years and had heard stories from other workers about the things that lived down there. Most people dismissed them as urban legends or the ramblings of men who'd spent too much time in the dark. But Mike had seen things, creatures that defied explanation, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy, and evidence of a whole underground society that existed right beneath our feet. He told me about the underground economy based on fear, how stories and sightings were traded like currency among those in the know. "The more people believe, the stronger they get," he said cryptically. "It's like they feed on our fear." I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to process what I'd seen and heard. When I got home, I immediately jumped online, searching for any information I could find about underground creatures or sewer monsters. To my surprise, I found entire forums dedicated to the topic, filled with first-hand accounts that chilled me to the bone. As I read through the stories, I started to see patterns emerging. The same symbols I'd seen on the walls were described by others. The green-eyed creatures appeared in multiple accounts, and there was a pervasive sense that something bigger was going on, that the horrors in the sewers were just the tip of the iceberg. I stayed up all night, falling down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and paranormal encounters. By the time the sun came up, my mind was reeling with possibilities. What if everything we thought we knew about our world was just a facade? What if there really was a whole other reality existing just beneath the surface of our cities? I called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of going back down into those tunnels. Mike texted me, asking if I was okay and reminding me to keep quiet about what we'd seen. But how could I just go on with my life, pretending that nothing had happened? As I sit here now, writing this out, I'm still not sure what to believe. Part of me wants to dismiss it all as a hallucination brought on by the toxic fumes in the sewers. But I know deep down that what I saw was real. And I can't shake the feeling that by sharing this story, I'm somehow contributing to that underground economy of fear. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm too scared to go back to work, but I'm also terrified of what might happen if I start digging deeper into this mystery. All I know is that I'll never look at a manhole cover the same way again. And every time I hear a strange noise coming from beneath the streets, I'll wonder what horrors are lurking just out of sight, waiting for their next victim to stumble into their dark domain. If you're reading this, consider it a warning. The world beneath our feet is not what we think it is. There are things down there that defy explanation, and they're getting stronger with every whispered story and terrified glance into the shadows. Be careful where you step, and always listen for the growls in the dark. Because once you've seen what's really down there, You can never unsee it, and you'll never feel safe in your own city again. I never really thought much about what lies beneath our city streets until that day. It started out as a normal Tuesday morning. I was walking to work, taking my usual route down Fifth Avenue, when I noticed something odd. There was a manhole cover in the sidewalk that I'd never seen before. I must have walked past that spot hundreds of times, but I could have sworn it was never there. I probably would have just ignored it and kept walking, but as I got closer, I realized the manhole cover was slightly ajar, just a tiny gap, but enough to make me curious. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. Against my better judgment, I crouched down to peek through the gap. At first, all I could see was darkness, but as my eyes adjusted, I started to make out something. It looked like a vast underground chamber stretching out beneath the city. I could see faint lights twinkling in the distance, like stars in a subterranean sky. Before I could process what I was seeing, I felt a sudden rush of air from below, and the manhole cover shifted. In a panic, I scrambled backwards, but it was too late. The cover gave way completely, and I found myself falling. It felt like I was tumbling through empty space for ages, though it was probably only a few seconds. I landed hard on a cold metal surface, knocking the wind out of me. As I lay there gasping for breath, I became aware of a low mechanical hum all around me. I slowly sat up, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. I was in some kind of massive underground chamber, just like I'd glimpsed from above. But now that I was down here, I could see it was far bigger and more complex than I'd imagined. The chamber seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The ceiling was so high I could barely make it out, lost in shadows. All around me were towering structures that looked like a cross between industrial machinery and organic growths. Pipes and conduits snaked everywhere, pulsing with an eerie bioluminescent glow. In the distance, I could see strange geometric shapes moving rhythmically, almost like they were breathing. I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding. Where the hell was I? How could something like this exist under the city without anyone knowing? I looked up, hoping to see where I'd fallen from, but there was no sign of any opening, just that vast, dark ceiling far above. I started walking, hoping to find some way out, or at least figure out where I was. The metal floor clanged hollowly under my feet. As I moved deeper into the chamber, I began to notice more details. There were what looked like control panels set into some of the structures, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. In places, the pipes opened up into swirling vortexes of light and mist. The air felt thick and heavy, with an odd metallic taste, and there was that constant background hum, sometimes rising to a pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. I had the unnerving sense that the whole place was alive somehow, that all these bizarre machines were part of some vast living system. After what felt like hours of walking, I still hadn't found any clear way out. I was starting to panic, wondering if I'd be trapped down here forever. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling sound coming from somewhere ahead. At first I thought it might be some kind of machinery, but as it got louder I realized it sounded more organic, like the growl of some huge beast. I froze, unsure whether to run or hide. Before I could decide, I saw movement in the shadows ahead. Something massive was moving towards me. As it came into view, I felt my blood run cold. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, a writhing mass of tentacles and machinery, fused together into some kind of hybrid monstrosity. Glowing eyes studded its form, all fixing on me at once. I turned and ran, my heart feeling like it would burst out of my chest. I could hear the thing pursuing me, metal clanging and tentacles slapping against the floor. I darted between the looming structures, desperately looking for somewhere to hide. Just when I thought the creature would overtake me, I spotted a small opening in one of the pipe-covered walls. Without hesitation, I dove for it. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to wriggle through just as I felt something brush against my leg. I found myself in a narrow maintenance tunnel, barely big enough to crawl through. I could hear the creature outside, its massive bulk preventing it from following me in. But I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. I started crawling through the tunnel, having to contort my body to fit around bends and junctions. The walls were covered in more of those strange symbols I'd seen before. As I moved, I started to notice patterns in them, like they formed some kind of complex code or language. After what felt like miles of crawling, I emerged into another large chamber. This one was different from the first. It looked almost like some kind of control center. Banks of screens covered the walls, displaying incomprehensible data and images. In the center was a raised platform with what looked like a pilot's chair, surrounded by holographic displays. I approached cautiously, marveling at the advanced technology. None of this seemed like it should be possible. As I got closer to the central platform, the screens suddenly came to life. A disembodied voice spoke, making me jump. Unauthorized presence detected, initiating security protocols. Before I could react, metal restraints shot out from the chair and wrapped around my arms and legs. I was pulled into the seat, unable to move. The holographic displays swirled around me, resolving into a 3D map of the city above. But it wasn't just showing the streets and buildings. I could see pulsing lines of energy running beneath everything, connecting to the vast underground system I'd discovered. "You should not be here," the voice said. "You have seen too much. We cannot allow knowledge of the system to spread." "What is this place?" I demanded, struggling against my bonds. "Who are you?" "We are the custodians," the voice replied. "We maintain the hidden infrastructure that keeps your world functioning. The power grids, the data networks, the very fabric of reality, all flow through the system. But it must remain secret. The surface dwellers are not ready to know the truth." My mind reeled, trying to process what I was hearing. "So what happens to me now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "You have two choices," the voice said. "You can join us as a custodian, dedicate your life to maintaining the system, or we can erase your memories of this place and return you to the surface." I was silent for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me was fascinated by what I'd seen, tempted by the offer to learn more. But a larger part just wanted to go home and forget this ever happened. In the end, that's the choice I made. "Erase my memories," I said. "I don't want to know about any of this." "Very well," the voice replied. "Initiating memory wipe protocol." The holographic displays swirled faster around me, becoming a blur of light and color. I felt a strange pressure building in my head. The last thing I remember is a blinding flash. And then I was waking up in my own bed, as if from a vivid dream. I went about my day as normal, walking to work down Fifth Avenue. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different, like the world wasn't quite as I remembered it. Sometimes I catch glimpses of things that don't seem quite right. Symbols etched into the sidewalk, strange lights flickering in dark alleys. But whenever I try to focus on them, they slip away. I'm left with the nagging sense that there's more to our world than meets the eye, layers of hidden systems just out of sight. I'll probably never know for sure what really happened that day. Maybe it was all just a dream or hallucination, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear a faint mechanical hum coming from beneath the streets. And I wonder what other secrets might be hiding in the spaces between what we think we know about our world. Never thought a cigarette would save my life, but that's exactly what happened down in those God-forsaken tunnels. It all started when I took a job with the city's sewage maintenance department. Money was tight, and I figured it couldn't be that bad, just routine inspections and minor repairs, right? Man, was I wrong. My first day on the job, my supervisor, Jake, took me down into the maze of tunnels beneath the city. The stench hit me like a wall as we descended the rusty ladder. Jake must have seen me grimace because he chuckled and said, "You'll get used to it, kid. Just wait till you see what else is down here." I thought he was joking, trying to scare the new guy. I wish he had been. We spent hours trudging through the dank passageways, checking for blockages and cracks in the ancient brick walls. Jake chain-smoked the whole time, lighting one cigarette after another. I found it odd given how health-conscious he seemed otherwise, always going on about his vegan diet and CrossFit routine. "Thought you didn't smoke," I commented as he lit up for the dozenth time. Jake's face got real serious. "Listen carefully," he said in a low voice. "You smoke down here, always. It's not about the nicotine, it's about staying alive." Before I could ask what the hell he meant, a skittering sound echoed from a nearby tunnel. Jake's eyes went wide. He grabbed my arm and yanked me into a side passage, pressing us both against the slimy wall. "Don't move," he hissed. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever was out there would hear it. Jake took a long drag on his cigarette, then slowly exhaled a stream of smoke. The acrid cloud drifted lazily into the main tunnel. That's when I saw it. A thing slithered by, just visible through the haze of smoke. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but wrong somehow. Its limbs were too long, too flexible, and its skin, dear God, its skin looked inside out, glistening wetly in the dim light. I bit back a scream, every muscle in my body rigid with terror. Jake kept smoking, sending more tendrils of smoke into the air between us and that monstrosity. After what felt like an eternity, the creature moved on, disappearing into the darkness. Jake waited a full minute before relaxing his grip on my arm. "That's why we smoke down here," he said grimly. "The smell masks our scent, and they don't like the smoke, confuses their senses or something." I stammered out a string of questions, but Jake just shook his head. "I don't know what they are or where they came from. All I know is they've been down here a long time, and they're hungry. Now come on, we need to finish our route and get topside." He handed me a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get one lit. "Keep smoking," Jake warned. "No matter what happens, don't let that cigarette go out." The rest of the shift passed in a blur of terror. Every shadow, every distant echo had me on edge. I went through half the pack, choking and coughing but not daring to stop. We saw two more of those things, always at a distance, always retreating from our smoke screen. When we finally climbed out of that nightmare labyrinth, I wanted nothing more than to quit on the spot. But Jake talked me out of it. "Look," he said, "I know it's scary as hell, but someone's got to maintain the infrastructure down there. If the sewers fail, those things could find their way to the surface. We're the only line of defense." He was right, of course, so I stayed on, learning the intricacies of the job. both the official duties and the unofficial protocols that kept us alive. Always work in pairs, always carry extra batteries for your headlamp, and always, always smoke. Over the next few months, I had more encounters with the tunnel dwellers. Once, my cigarette went out just as one of them rounded a corner. I fumbled with my lighter, cursing my trembling fingers as the creature approached. Its eyeless face turned toward me, lipless mouth gaping to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Just as I was certain I was done for, my partner Tom appeared, blowing a thick cloud of smoke that sent the monster reeling back into the darkness. Another time, we stumbled upon what looked like a nest, a writhing mass of pale, elongated limbs and pulsing flesh. The stench was overwhelming, even worse than the usual sewer reek. We backed away slowly, chain-smoking furiously, to create a protective fog around us. But the worst incident happened about 6 months into the job. We were doing an inspection in a particularly old section of the tunnels when part of the ceiling collapsed, separating me from my partner. I was trapped in a small chamber, the exit blocked by fallen debris. I could hear Mike calling for me, saying he was going to get help, but we both knew it would take hours for a rescue team to reach me. Hours alone in the dark, with God knows what lurking nearby. I still had my headlamp, thankfully, and a nearly full pack of cigarettes. I chain-smoked like my life depended on it, because it did. Every few minutes I'd hear something moving on the other side of the rubble, claws scraping on stone, that awful wet slithering sound that haunts my nightmares. My throat was raw, my lungs burning, but I didn't dare stop smoking. The hours crawled by like years. My lamp began to flicker and die, plunging me into near-total darkness. I was down to my last cigarette when I heard voices and saw flashlight beams penetrating the gloom. The rescue team broke through just as that final cigarette burned down to the filter. They pulled me out, asking if I was hurt. I couldn't even speak, just shook my head and gulped down fresh air. Later, after I'd recovered somewhat, Mike told me they'd found 3 of those creatures prowling around the cave-in site. If I hadn't kept smoking, masking my scent, I still work in the sewers. Someone has to. But now I carry multiple packs of cigarettes, waterproof matches, and a couple of flares for backup. I've learned to always be alert, to never let my guard down. Sometimes I wonder about the ethics of what we do. Should we tell people about the monsters lurking beneath their feet? Try to eradicate them somehow? But then I think about the chaos and panic that would ensue, the damage it could do if those things got to the surface. So we stay silent, we smoke, and we pray that the thin veil of tobacco smoke is enough to keep the horrors at bay. Because in those tunnels, a cigarette isn't just a bad habit. It's the only thing standing between us and a fate worse than death. I never thought I'd end up living in the sewers, but life has a way of throwing curveballs at you. My name's Jack, and about 6 months ago, I lost my job, my apartment, and pretty much everything else. With nowhere else to go, I reluctantly joined the ranks of the homeless on the streets of Chicago. Those first few weeks were brutal. The shelters were overcrowded and dangerous. Sleeping on park benches left me vulnerable to thieves and police harassment. I was at my lowest point, contemplating some pretty dark thoughts, when I met old Tom. Tom had been living on the streets for years, and he took me under his wing. He showed me the ropes of surviving day to day and introduced me to an underground community I never knew existed, literally underground. The sewers and tunnels are where the real action is, Tom told me one day. It's dangerous down there, but if you know the right people, you can carve out a decent life away from all the bullshit up here. I was skeptical at first. The thought of living in dank, filthy tunnels was repulsive. But as Tom explained more, I began to see the appeal. No cops hassling you, no worrying about the weather, a hidden world where society's rejects could build their own community. After a particularly rough night, dodging aggressive drunks and nearly getting mugged, I decided to take Tom up on his offer to show me the underground. We waited until well after midnight, then made our way to a nondescript manhole cover in an abandoned lot. Tom deftly pried it open with a crowbar and motioned for me to follow him down the rusty ladder. The stench hit me immediately, a noxious mix of rot, waste, and mildew that made my eyes water. But I pushed through it and kept climbing down. At the bottom, Tom pulled out a flashlight and led me through a maze of tunnels. The walls were slick with slime and who knows what. Rats scurried by our feet. I tried not to think about what else might be lurking in the shadows. After about 15 minutes of walking, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. To my amazement, I saw makeshift living spaces set up, tents, sleeping bags, even some old furniture. A group of people were huddled around a small fire, cooking something in a pot. "Welcome to the underworld," Tom said with a grin. Over the next few days, Tom introduced me to the denizens of this hidden society. There was Mary, a former nurse who lost everything to a gambling addiction. John, a veteran struggling with PTSD. Teenage runaways, ex-cons, addicts, all kinds of lost souls who had found a sort of refuge down here. It wasn't paradise by any means. The constant damp and darkness wore on you. Food was scarce and disease spread easily. Territorial disputes between different groups sometimes turned violent. But there was also a sense of community and acceptance I hadn't felt in a long time. I decided to stay and try to make a go of it underground. Tom helped me set up a small living space in an alcove off one of the main tunnels. I scavenged for usable items topside and brought them back down to trade or use. Slowly but surely, I began to adapt to this strange new world. One night, about a month into my subterranean life, I was jolted awake by screams echoing through the tunnels. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed out to see what was happening. A group had gathered near one of the larger chambers, looks of horror on their faces. As I pushed through the crowd, I saw the source of the commotion. A body lay crumpled on the ground, throat torn out. It was Mary, the ex-nurse. The attack looked almost animal in nature, but no rat or normal pest could do that kind of damage. Panic spread quickly through the community. Some thought it was a crazed junkie on a bad trip. Others whispered about monsters living in the deepest tunnels. A few packed up and left for the surface immediately. I helped Tom and some others move Mary's body to a secluded area where we could give her a makeshift funeral. As we carried her, I noticed strange marks on her arms and legs, almost like suction cups. A chill ran down my spine. Over the next week, 2 more bodies turned up in similar condition. Fear gripped the underworld. People traveled in groups and set up patrols. Weapons were fashioned out of pipes and scrap metal. Sleep became nearly impossible as every little sound had us on edge. I started to hear whispers about the creeper, some kind of creature that supposedly lurked in the oldest, deepest parts of the tunnels. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, but doubt began to creep into my mind. What if there really was something inhuman down here with us? One night, I was on patrol with John when we heard a blood-curdling shriek from a nearby tunnel. We sprinted towards the sound, hearts pounding. As we rounded a corner, our flashlights illuminated a scene straight out of a nightmare. A massive, pale, almost translucent creature had a young woman pinned against the wall. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but with elongated limbs and rows of suckers lining its arms. A lamprey-like mouth full of teeth was latched onto the woman's neck. John let out a yell and charged at the thing with his metal pipe raised. The creature's head snapped towards us, milky eyes glowing in the darkness. It released its grip on the woman, who crumpled to the ground. With shocking speed, it skittered up the wall and disappeared into a crack in the ceiling before we could react. We rushed to the woman, but it was too late. Her glassy eyes stared at nothing as blood pooled around her. Word of the encounter spread like wildfire. Mass panic set in, and people began fleeing to the surface in droves. Those who stayed formed armed groups to hunt down the creature, but found nothing. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. I wanted to leave too, but something held me back. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or a desire to see this through to the end. Tom and a few others felt the same way. We fortified our living area and kept constant watch. Days passed with no sign of the creature. Some began to think it had moved on to other hunting grounds. But deep down, I knew it was still out there, waiting. Late one night, I was jolted awake by a strange sound, a wet, slithering noise coming from the tunnel outside. My blood ran cold as I saw a pale shape ooze through a tiny crack in the wall, reforming into that nightmarish figure on the other side. It hadn't left. It had been hiding in the walls this whole time, watching us, learning our patterns. And now it had come for me. I scrambled for my weapon, but the creature was on me in a flash. Its cold, slimy limbs wrapped around me as that horrifying mouth opened wide. I struggled with all my might, but its strength was inhuman. Just as I felt needle-sharp teeth graze my neck, there was a thunderous boom. The creature's head exploded in a spray of pale gore. It collapsed, revealing Tom standing in the doorway with a shotgun. "I've been saving this for a special occasion," he said grimly. We burned the creature's remains and sealed off that section of tunnels. Most of the remaining underworld residents left for good after that, but a few of us stayed. This was our home now, for better or worse. Sometimes late at night, I still hear strange noises in the walls, probably just rats or my imagination. But a part of me wonders, what if there are more of those things down here? What other secrets is this underground world hiding? I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe down here again, but in a way, that's no different than life on the surface. At least down here I have a community, a purpose. It may not be pretty, but it's home. So I'll keep living in the shadows, eyes and ears always alert, ready for whatever horrors the underworld might throw at me next. Because sometimes the monsters lurking below are easier to face than the ones up above. I work as a maintenance technician for the city's underground transit system. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and I've always been fascinated by the maze of tunnels beneath our feet. Little did I know that this fascination would lead me to experience something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a typical Tuesday night shift. I was assigned to inspect a section of tunnels that hadn't been used in years. The city was considering reopening them for a new line, so they wanted us to check the structural integrity and overall condition. I grabbed my gear and headed down into the depths of the city. As I made my way through the dimly lit passages, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, and there was an eerie silence that seemed to swallow up even the sound of my footsteps. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination running wild in the dark, abandoned tunnels. About an hour into my inspection, I reached a junction that wasn't on any of our maps. It was strange, considering how meticulously documented the tunnel system was supposed to be. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to explore a bit further. As I ventured down this unknown passage, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath started to fog in front of me, which was odd for a summer night. The walls seemed to close in, and the ceiling lowered until I had to hunch over to keep moving forward. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper echoing through the tunnel. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened closer, I could make out words. They were in a language I didn't understand, but the tone sent chills down my spine. It sounded like a mix of desperation and warning. I should have turned back right then and there, but something compelled me to keep going. It was like I was in a trance, drawn forward by an unseen force. The whispers grew louder, and I could swear I saw shadows moving at the edge of my flashlight's beam. Suddenly, my light flickered and went out. I was plunged into complete darkness, the kind that seems to press against your eyeballs. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my backup light. As I clicked it on, I let out a scream that I'm sure echoed all the way back to the main tunnels. Standing just a few feet in front of me was a figure. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Its eyes were huge, black voids that seemed to suck in what little light there was. But what terrified me the most was its mouth. It was moving, forming words, and I realized with horror that this was the source of the whispers. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the direction. I just needed to get away. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I could hear something moving behind me, its footsteps echoing off the walls. The whispers had turned into a deafening roar, filling my head with sounds of anguish and rage. I don't know how long I ran or how I found my way back to the main tunnels. All I remember is collapsing at the feet of my coworker, gasping for air and babbling incoherently about what I'd seen. They called an ambulance, thinking I'd had some kind of breakdown. In the hospital, they told me I was suffering from oxygen deprivation and hallucinations caused by toxic fumes. They said it wasn't uncommon in the older, poorly ventilated sections of the tunnels. But I know what I saw was real. The terror I felt was too visceral to be a hallucination. The worst part is, I'm not the only one. Since that night, I've heard whispers, the normal kind, from other workers. Stories of strange encounters in the tunnels, of feelings of being watched, of inexplicable noises and sightings. It's like there's this collective trauma that we're all carrying, but no one wants to talk about it openly. I've tried to go back to work, but every time I step into those tunnels, the memories come flooding back. The darkness seems to press in on me, and I can't shake the feeling that something is lurking just out of sight, waiting. I've started having nightmares, reliving that moment when I first saw the figure. Sometimes in my dreams, I don't get away. I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. The city never reopened that section of tunnels. They said it was due to structural concerns, but I can't help but wonder if someone else saw what I saw, if they know what's really down there. I've tried talking to a therapist about it, but how do you explain something like this without sounding crazy? How do you process an experience that defies everything you thought you knew about reality? The worst part is the not knowing. What was that thing? Why was it there? Are there more of them? These questions haunt me every day. I find myself obsessively researching urban legends and conspiracy theories about underground civilizations, hoping to find some explanation for what I encountered. I've even reached out to some of my coworkers who've had similar experiences. We meet sometimes, in hushed tones at a local bar, sharing our stories and trying to make sense of it all. It's comforting to know I'm not alone, but it's also terrifying to realize how widespread these encounters are. One guy, Tom, told me about how he found a room deep in the tunnels that wasn't on any blueprint. He said it was filled with strange symbols carved into the walls and floor. When he tried to photograph them, his phone died instantly. Another co-worker, Maria, swears she saw a group of pale, childlike figures scurrying through a maintenance shaft. They moved impossibly fast and disappeared without a trace. These stories have created a sort of underground culture among us transit workers. We've become guardians of a secret world, one that exists right beneath the feet of millions of unsuspecting city dwellers. It's a heavy burden to bear, knowing that there's something down there that defies explanation. I've tried to move on, to forget about what happened. I've even considered quitting my job and moving to another city. But something keeps me here. Maybe it's a sense of responsibility, a feeling that I need to be here to warn others or to uncover the truth. Or maybe it's just that the experience has changed me so fundamentally that I can't imagine going back to a normal life. Every time I hear about a missing person in the city, my mind immediately goes to those tunnels. Are they down there, lost in that labyrinth of darkness? Have they encountered what I did? The guilt of not being able to do anything, of not being believed, is almost as bad as the fear. Sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I swear I can still hear those whispers. They seem to seep up through the cracks in the pavement, carrying with them the weight of countless untold stories. It's a reminder that there's a whole world beneath our feet that we know nothing about, and maybe that's for the best. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what I experienced that night. The memory of it is etched into my mind, a constant reminder of how fragile our understanding of reality really is. All I can do is try to live with it, to carry this knowledge with me and hope that one day I'll find some answers. For now, I'll continue to walk the streets of this city, always aware of what lies beneath. And if you ever find yourself in those tunnels and you hear a whisper or see a shadow that shouldn't be there, remember my story. Turn back while you still can. Some secrets are better left uncovered, some doors better left unopened. Because once you've seen what's on the other side, there's no going back to the way things were before. It all started when I inherited my grandfather's old house after he passed away. I'd always been close to him, and he'd told me stories about the strange things he'd seen and experienced in that house over the years. I never took them seriously, chalking it up to an old man's imagination running wild. How wrong I was. The house was a massive Victorian-era building, tucked away in a remote wooded area. As I was going through his belongings, I stumbled upon a hidden room in the basement. It was filled with all sorts of old technology, ancient computers, strange gadgets, and equipment I couldn't even begin to identify. My grandfather had always been a bit of a tech enthusiast and tinkerer, but this was something else entirely. Among the clutter, I found a pair of what looked like night vision goggles, but they were unlike any I'd ever seen before. They were bulky and clearly custom-made, with all sorts of weird attachments and modifications. Curious, I decided to try them on. The moment I put them on and switched them on, the world around me changed. The dingy basement transformed into a swirling vortex of colors and shapes I couldn't even begin to describe. It was like looking into another dimension. I quickly yanked them off, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell had I just seen? Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to that room, to those goggles. Each time I put them on, I saw more. Strange entities moving through the walls, shadows that shouldn't exist, doorways to places that couldn't possibly be there. It was terrifying, but I couldn't stop myself from looking. One night, I decided to explore the house while wearing the goggles. As I walked through the halls, I saw things that defied explanation. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Shadows darted just out of sight, always staying just at the edge of my vision. And the sounds. God, the sounds. Whispers in languages that no human throat could produce, skittering noises from unseen creatures. I made my way to the attic, a place I'd avoided since moving in. With the goggles on, I could see that the entire room was alive with activity. Ghostly figures moved about, seemingly unaware of my presence. In the center of the room stood a tall, imposing figure that seemed to be made of pure darkness. It turned towards me, and even though it had no face, I could feel its gaze piercing through me. Panic set in, and I scrambled to get out of there. As I ran down the stairs, I could hear something following me. The goggles showed me glimpses of tentacle-like appendages reaching out from the walls, trying to grab me. I made it to the basement and slammed the door shut behind me, my heart feeling like it was about to burst out of my chest. Breathing heavily, I turned to face the room full of technology. That's when I noticed one of the old computers had come to life. Its screen was filled with strange symbols and equations that hurt my eyes to look at. Without thinking, I approached it and began typing. To my shock, the computer responded. It was like having a conversation with something not quite human. It told me about the nature of reality, about the thin veil that separates our world from others. It explained that my grandfather had spent his life trying to bridge that gap, to see and interact with the things that exist just beyond our perception. As I continued to interact with the computer, I began to feel a strange sensation. It was as if my consciousness was expanding, reaching out beyond the confines of my body. I could feel the presence of something all around me. It was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. Suddenly, the computer screen went black, and I heard a loud crack. The goggles on my face began to spark and smoke. I tore them off and threw them across the room, where they shattered into pieces. In that moment, everything went quiet. The oppressive feeling that had been building up suddenly vanished. I stood there in the silent basement, trying to process what had just happened. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, too afraid to move. When morning came, I packed a bag and left the house. I haven't been back since. It's been months now, and I still can't shake the feeling that I glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of those same shadowy figures I saw through the goggles. And at night, I swear I can hear those same inhuman whispers. I've tried to research what happened to me, to find some explanation for it all. But every time I get close to finding answers, my computer mysteriously crashes, or the websites I'm looking at suddenly disappear. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to go back to the house, to try and understand what's really going on. But a bigger part of me is terrified of what I might find if I do. What if those things I saw are still there, waiting for me? What if they found a way to cross over into our world? I can't help but wonder if my grandfather knew what he was dealing with. Did he spend his whole life trying to communicate with these entities? And if so, what did they tell him? What did he learn? I'm sharing this story as a warning. There are things out there beyond our understanding, things that we're not equipped to deal with. Technology might give us a window into these other realms, but it can't protect us from what we might find there. If you ever come across strange, custom-built tech, especially if it's old and seems to be designed for seeing or communicating, please, for your own sake, leave it alone. Some doors are better left unopened, some boundaries better left uncrossed. As for me, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder now, always half expecting to see one of those shadowy figures. I've considered destroying all my electronics, cutting myself off completely. But even as I write this, I can feel that same pull, that same curiosity that got me into this mess in the first place. I don't know what's going to happen next. All I know is that my view of reality has been forever changed. There's more out there than we can possibly imagine, and not all of it is friendly. Be careful out there, and remember, just because we can see something doesn't mean we should. I never thought I'd find myself crawling through pitch-black tunnels underneath the city, but there I was, inching forward on my hands and knees, the beam of my headlamp barely penetrating the oppressive darkness ahead. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every scrape and echo sent chills down my spine. But I couldn't turn back now. This was my chance to prove myself, to finally be accepted by the group I'd been trying to impress for months. It all started when I overheard some of the cool kids at school talking about urban exploration. They described sneaking into abandoned buildings and underground spaces, pushing the limits of what was safe or legal. It sounded terrifying but thrilling. I wanted so badly to be part of something exciting, to shed my reputation as a boring, play-it-safe nerd. So I worked up the courage to ask if I could join them sometime. They were skeptical at first, eyeing me up and down like I was some kind of imposter. But eventually they agreed to let me tag along on one condition. I had to complete their initiation ritual. They wouldn't tell me exactly what it entailed, just that it would test my limits and prove whether I had what it took to run with their crew. That's how I found myself meeting up with them at midnight near an old storm drain on the outskirts of town. There were 5 of them: the ringleader Jake, his girlfriend Amber, and 3 other guys whose names I didn't catch. They all had an air of confidence and excitement that made me feel even more out of place. Jake explained that my task was to navigate through the storm drain system to a specific exit point about a mile away. I'd have to crawl, climb, and wade through tight spaces and murky water. And I had to do it alone, with just a headlamp and a crude hand-drawn map. If I made it out within 2 hours, I was in. If not, game over. My stomach dropped as the reality of what I'd gotten myself into sank in. But I couldn't back out now, so I strapped on the headlamp, took a deep breath, and ducked into the yawning mouth of the drain pipe. The first stretch wasn't too bad. I could almost stand upright, shuffling along in ankle-deep water. But soon the passage narrowed and descended sharply. I had to get on all fours, the cold water now up to my elbows. The sound of my splashing seemed deafening in the enclosed space. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, I reached a junction where multiple pipes converged. I pulled out the damp, crumpled map, trying to orient myself. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely read it. I chose what I hoped was the right path and pressed on. The next section was even tighter, forcing me to army crawl on my belly. Claustrophobia started to set in. I focused on my breathing, trying to stay calm. But then my light flickered, plunging me into total darkness for a heart-stopping moment before sputtering back to life. I nearly panicked right then and there. Somehow I kept going, even as the air grew thinner and staler. My clothes were soaked through, my hands and knees scraped raw from the rough concrete. I lost all sense of time and direction. At one point I disturbed a cluster of sleeping bats, their leathery wings brushing against my face as they fled. I had to bite back a scream. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, I saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. Hope surged through me as I scrambled towards it, but my elation turned to horror as I realized the light was coming from below. There was a sheer drop-off just ahead. I inched forward cautiously, shining my light down. It was some kind of underground reservoir or cistern, stretching out vast and dark below me. The only way forward was a narrow ledge hugging the wall, with a rusty ladder at the far end, leading up to what looked like a manhole cover. My legs felt like jelly as I edged out onto the ledge. It was barely wide enough for my feet. One wrong move, and I'd plummet into the inky water below. I pressed myself flat against the wall, willing myself not to look down as I sidled along inch by agonizing inch. About halfway across, I heard an ominous creaking sound. Before I could react, a section of the ledge crumbled away beneath my feet. I lurched forward, barely catching myself on a protruding pipe. For several terrifying seconds I dangled there, legs kicking uselessly in open air. Adrenaline surged through me as I struggled to pull myself up. My arms burned with the effort. Just as I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I managed to haul myself back onto the ledge. I lay there gasping and trembling, too scared to move. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Slowly, painstakingly, I resumed my journey across. When I finally reached the ladder, I climbed it so fast I was practically flying. I shoved against the manhole cover with all my strength, praying it wasn't locked. To my immense relief, it shifted. I heaved it aside and hauled myself out, collapsing onto blessed solid ground. I was in some kind of abandoned lot, overgrown with weeds. The night sky stretched out above me, studded with stars. I'd never been so happy to see the open air. As I lay there catching my breath, I heard voices approaching. It was Jake and the others, whooping and cheering. They crowded around me, clapping me on the back and helping me to my feet. "Holy shit, you actually did it," Jake exclaimed. "And with 10 minutes to spare, not bad, newbie." I was too exhausted and shell-shocked to respond. Part of me wanted to punch him for putting me through that nightmare, but a larger part felt an intoxicating rush of pride and accomplishment. I'd faced my fears and come out the other side. For the first time in my life, I felt brave. The others were rattling off stories of their own initiation experiences, comparing notes on the scariest parts. I found myself joining in, the terror of the ordeal already fading into an exhilarating memory. As we walked back towards town, I felt a new sense of belonging. These people had seen me at my most vulnerable and frightened, and accepted me anyway. We shared a secret bond now, forged in the depths of the earth. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn more and more into their world of urban exploration. We ventured into abandoned factories, crumbling mansions, forgotten subway tunnels. Each expedition brought new thrills and challenges. I discovered reserves of courage and resourcefulness I never knew I had, but nothing quite matched the intensity of that first underground journey. It marked a turning point in my life, the moment I stopped being a passive observer and became an active participant in my own story. The memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine, but it also fills me with a fierce pride. I faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it, and I know now that whatever life throws at me, I have the strength to overcome it. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be questioning my own sanity, but here I am, still trying to process what happened to me last week. It all started when I stumbled upon an old map at a flea market. Being an avid collector of antique cartography, I couldn't resist the allure of this peculiar piece. The map was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was intricately detailed, with strange symbols and markings that I couldn't quite decipher. The seller, an elderly man with a knowing glint in his eye, told me it was a map of the invisible world. I chuckled, thinking it was just a clever marketing ploy, and bought it for a bargain price. Little did I know that this purchase would lead me down a rabbit hole I never could have imagined. That night I spent hours poring over the map, trying to make sense of its cryptic markings. As I traced my fingers along the lines, I felt a strange tingling sensation. Suddenly, the room around me began to shift and blur. I blinked, thinking I was just tired, but when I opened my eyes again, I found myself in a completely different place. I was standing in what appeared to be an underground tunnel. The air was damp and musty, and I could hear the faint sound of rushing water in the distance. Panic set in as I realized I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there. I fumbled in my pocket and, to my relief, found the map still there. As I unfolded it, I noticed something odd. The markings on the map were moving, shifting like living creatures, and to my astonishment, I could see a small blinking dot that seemed to represent my current location. It was as if the map had come to life, revealing a hidden world beneath the surface of reality. With no other choice, I decided to follow the map. As I made my way through the winding tunnels, I began to notice strange things, shadows that moved independently of any light source, whispers in languages I'd never heard before, and glimpses of creatures that defied description. I walked for what felt like hours, the map guiding me through this labyrinth of the impossible. At times, I'd pass through areas that seemed to defy the laws of physics, rooms where gravity worked differently, corridors that looped back on themselves impossibly, and chambers filled with objects that changed shape when I wasn't looking directly at them. The deeper I ventured, the more I realized that this wasn't just some hidden physical place. It was as if I had stumbled into the very fabric of reality itself, a place where the rules of our world didn't apply. I saw memories floating like bubbles, ideas taking physical form, and emotions manifesting as colorful mists. As I continued my journey, I began to encounter other people, or at least beings that looked like people. They seemed just as lost and confused as I was. We tried to communicate, but our words came out as indecipherable sounds. Yet somehow, we understood each other on a deeper level. I learned that they, too, had found maps similar to mine, each one leading them to this strange realm. One of these individuals, a woman with eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies, gestured for me to follow her. She led me to a vast chamber filled with what looked like floating screens. On each screen, I could see different versions of our world, some familiar, others completely alien. It was as if we were in a control room for all of reality. The woman pointed to one of the screens, and I saw myself sitting at home, staring at the map. Was this how I had entered this place? Had I somehow projected my consciousness here while my physical body remained in the real world? Just as I was beginning to grasp the magnitude of what I was experiencing, alarms began to blare. The screens started to flicker, and the entire chamber shook violently. The other beings around me began to panic, rushing towards exits I couldn't see. The woman who had guided me grabbed my arm, her touch sending electric shocks through my body. She pressed something into my hand. It felt like a small, smooth stone, and pushed me towards one of the screens. As I stumbled forward, I felt myself being pulled apart and reassembled, atom by atom. In a flash, I was back in my room, gasping for air, the map clutched tightly in my hands. I looked at my clock. Only an hour had passed since I first started examining the map, but the experiences I had felt like days. I've spent the past week trying to make sense of what happened. Was it all a hallucination, a vivid dream? But every time I look at the map, I can still see those shifting markings, that blinking dot. And the small stone the woman gave me sits on my desk, a constant reminder that what I experienced was real. I've tried to find that flea market again, to talk to the old man who sold me the map, but it's as if it never existed. I've searched online for any information about similar experiences, but found nothing concrete. Now, I find myself torn between two desires. Part of me wants to destroy the map, to forget everything I saw and return to my normal life. But another part, a growing part, wants to dive back in, to explore more of that hidden world, to uncover its secrets. I know that if I choose to go back, I might not return. The dangers I glimpsed in that other realm were very real, but the possibility of mapping the invisible, of charting the unknown territories of existence itself, it's a temptation I'm finding harder and harder to resist. As I sit here, writing this, I can feel the map calling to me. The markings seem more vibrant, more alive. I know that soon I'll have to make a choice. Do I stay in the safety of the known world, or do I take the plunge into the unmapped territories of the invisible? Whatever I choose, I know that my perspective on reality has been forever changed. There are layers to our existence that we can't even begin to comprehend, hidden worlds running parallel to our own, and somewhere out there, there's a map to guide us through them all. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened to me, or if I'll ever be able to explain it to anyone else. But I do know that the next time I unfold that map, I'll be ready for whatever impossible journey awaits me in the cartography of the invisible. It was just another mundane Tuesday evening. I had finished work and was walking home through the city like I always do. The streets were busy with the usual after-work crowd, people hurrying to catch their trains or grab a quick drink before heading home. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As I walked, I noticed a man standing on the corner ahead, holding a stack of flyers. He was dressed in a plain black suit and had an unsettling blank expression. When I got closer, he held out one of the flyers to me. I hesitated for a moment, but then took it, figuring it was just an ad for a local business or something. I glanced down at the flyer as I continued walking. It was completely blank, except for a single line of text at the bottom that read, "The fear you feel is currency." I frowned, confused by the cryptic message. When I looked back up, the man was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Something about that interaction felt off, but I tried to shake it off as I kept walking. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. What did they mean? As I turned down a quieter side street, I suddenly became hyper-aware of my surroundings. The shadows seemed deeper, the air felt heavier. I picked up my pace, eager to get home. That's when I noticed someone walking behind me, I glanced back and saw a figure in a dark hoodie about half a block back. Probably nothing to worry about, but after that weird flyer incident, I was on edge. I sped up a bit more. The footsteps behind me quickened too. My heart started racing. I took a sharp turn down an alley, hoping to lose them. Big mistake. The alley was a dead end. I spun around, ready to confront whoever was following me. But there was no one there. The alley entrance was empty. I let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish for getting so worked up over nothing. As I turned to leave the alley, I froze. There on the wall was a poster I hadn't noticed before. It had the same stark design as the flyer, with a single line of text, "Your panic feeds us." I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. What the hell was going on? This had to be some kind of sick prank, right? I practically ran out of the alley and back to the main street. But something was different. The crowds were gone. The street was eerily empty and silent. How was that possible? It had been bustling with people just minutes ago. I started walking quickly towards home, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. That's when I saw them. Dark figures standing perfectly still on the sidewalks and in doorways. They were facing away from me, but as I passed, they slowly turned their heads to watch me. I couldn't make out any features, just black silhouettes with glowing white eyes. My breath came in short gasps as I picked up speed, trying not to run outright. I didn't want to provoke them, whatever they were. But with each block I passed, there were more of them. Soon they lined the streets on both sides, their blank faces all turned towards me. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a sprint, no longer caring if I looked crazy. I just needed to get home, to safety. As I ran, I heard whispers rising all around me. "Feed us your fear. Your terror sustains us. We hunger for your dread." The voices seemed to be coming from inside my own head. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. Tears streamed down my face as I ran blindly through the empty streets. Finally, I saw my apartment building up ahead. I fumbled for my keys with shaking hands and practically fell through the front door. I slammed it behind me and leaned against it, gasping for breath. The lobby was dark and silent. I made my way to the elevator, my legs trembling. As the doors slid open, I let out a strangled cry. The elevator was full of those shadowy figures, their glowing eyes all fixed on me. I scrambled for the stairs instead, taking them two at a time. I could hear footsteps echoing behind me, getting closer no matter how fast I ran. I burst into my apartment and locked the door, then shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. I backed away, my eyes glued to the door, waiting for them to break it down. But nothing happened. The apartment was totally silent. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to look out the peephole. The hallway was empty. I sank to the floor, my whole body shaking. What the hell had just happened? Had I imagined it all? I must have fallen asleep there on the floor, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows. I got up stiffly and looked outside. The street below was back to normal, filled with morning commuters going about their day. I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to make sense of what had happened. I scoured local news sites for any reports of strange occurrences, but found nothing. I even went back to that alley, but there was no sign of the poster I'd seen. It's been a week now, and everything seems normal, but I can't shake the feeling that something fundamental has changed. I find myself avoiding going out after dark. Every shadow makes me jump. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I can see those glowing white eyes watching me. I don't know what to make of it all. Was it some kind of mass hallucination? A vivid nightmare? Or something more sinister? All I know is that I'm left with this lingering sense of dread. like I've glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see, something that exists just beneath the surface of our everyday reality. The thing that scares me most is the idea that maybe, in some way, my fear is feeding something, that there's some kind of economy of terror out there, and I've unwittingly become part of it. I can't help but wonder, are there others out there who've experienced something similar? Are we all just fuel for some unseen, hungry force? I'm writing this partly to get it off my chest, and partly as a warning. Be careful out there. Pay attention to the shadows. And if a stranger tries to hand you a flyer, just keep walking. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. It all started on what seemed like a normal Tuesday. I work as a maintenance technician for the city's subway system. And that day, I was assigned to inspect one of the older tunnels that had been closed off for renovations. As I made my way down into the depths of the underground, I felt an odd sense of unease creeping over me. The air seemed thicker somehow, and the shadows cast by my headlamp danced strangely on the walls. I tried to shake it off. I'd been in these tunnels hundreds of times before, but something felt different. I reached the section I was meant to inspect and began my routine checks. As I ran my hands along the damp walls, testing for weak spots, I suddenly felt a strange vibration. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew stronger, pulsing through the stone like a heartbeat. I pulled my hand back, startled. That's when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement in the darkness beyond my light. I swung my lamp around, but saw nothing but empty tunnels stretching into blackness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing. "Is someone there?" No response, just the drip of water and the distant rumble of trains above. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the gloom. But then I heard it, a soft, raspy breathing coming from somewhere in the shadows. My heart began to race. I fumbled for my radio, but got nothing but static. The breathing grew louder, closer. I backed away slowly, my light sweeping frantically back and forth. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness. But it wasn't human, not entirely. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long and joints that bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched tight over protruding bones. But its face is what haunts me to this day. It was like a warped funhouse mirror version of a human face. The features were all there, but twisted and exaggerated. The eyes were huge and bulbous, seeming to glow faintly in the beam of my light. The mouth was a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. I stumbled backward, my scream caught in my throat. The creature cocked its head, regarding me with an unsettling curiosity. It took a step forward, moving with an eerie, fluid grace. That broke the spell of my paralysis. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the concrete as I sprinted back the way I had come. I could hear it behind me, a swift pattering of inhuman footsteps. As I ran, the tunnel seemed to stretch and warp around me. Shadows writhed and danced at the edges of my vision. I saw impossible things in those fleeting moments, glimpses of otherworldly landscapes, flashes of creatures that defied description. I burst out of the maintenance door and into the main station, gasping for breath. A few startled commuters stared at me as I emerged, wild-eyed and covered in grime. But when I turned back, the door had vanished. There was only smooth tile where it had been moments before. I stood there trembling and trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been some kind of hallucination? A moment of madness brought on by the isolation of the tunnels? But I could still feel the cold sweat on my skin still taste the acrid fear in my mouth. I reported the incident to my supervisor, of course, but I left out the stranger details, the warping of reality, the glimpses of other worlds. I knew how it would sound. They sent a team to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The tunnel was exactly as it should be, with no sign of the otherworldly encounter I had experienced. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been in my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brushed up against something beyond my understanding, the border between our world and something else. I started noticing things after that, little things at first, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, reflections in windows and mirrors that didn't quite match reality, the sensation of being watched when I was alone. And sometimes, late at night, I would wake to the sound of soft, raspy breathing coming from the darkest corners of my room. I've tried to research what happened to me. I've scoured the internet for similar stories, for any explanation of what I experienced. And I've found hints, whispers, other people who have had encounters in liminal spaces, those in-between places where reality seems to thin, subways, abandoned buildings, foggy forests at twilight, places where the veil between worlds grows weak and things can slip through. I've learned that the creature I saw is known by many names in different cultures: the rake, the crawler, the pale one, always described similarly, a twisted, elongated humanoid that lurks in the shadows between realities. Some believe these entities are interdimensional travelers, able to move between parallel worlds. Others think they're the product of human collective unconscious, tulpa-like beings given form by our deepest fears. Still others insist they're simply hallucinations, glitches in human perception. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that ever since that day in the tunnel, I've felt marked somehow. Like once you've seen behind the curtain of reality, you can never truly unsee it. I've quit my job with the subway. I can't bear to go underground anymore. But even above ground, I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, peering into shadows, searching reflections for things that shouldn't be there. Because I know the truth now. Our reality, the world we think we know, is just a thin veneer, and sometimes, in the right places, under the right conditions, that veneer cracks, and things come slipping through. I'm writing this as a warning, to let others know what's out there, lurking just beyond the edges of our perception. Be careful in those liminal spaces, those transitions between here and there, in subway tunnels and abandoned buildings, in fog-shrouded forests and mirror-filled rooms, because you never know when you might stumble across a thin spot, a place where realities bleed together. And once you've seen what's on the other side, you can never go back to not knowing. I still hear that raspy breathing sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night. And I wonder, did I truly escape that day in the tunnel? Or did I just bring a little piece of that other world back with me? All I know is that I'll never look at the shadows the same way again, because now I know what might be looking back.